Hello everybody and welcome to the final episode for Season 2 of Spill Yer Beans. We made it! Hallelujah! Yay! Okay, there's just absolutely silence other than me there. Thanks guys. Cheers!
We did it! Yeah. Yay!
Hear the sound of me and my audience. Today we are back with a panel review, the third ever panel review we've done on here, and I'm joined by two very wonderful guests. I'm joined by Josh Carr, fellow podcaster.
Hello, people.
And Owen likes comics, who I assume likes comics and does YouTube.
They are two things that I am known to have at least done once.
That's incredible. Thank you for that. Well, it's quite appropriate today because what we're discussing in the sort of build-up to the brand new Spider-Man film, which is obviously bringing together all parts of the Spider-Verse in cinema, I thought it would be very appropriate to do a Spider-Man panel review today, talking about all of the Spider-Man films, bar Venom, because I really couldn't be asked to talk about that one or two.
Sorry to the three people that wanted to hear me talk about Venom. Let There Be Carnage. I forgot to see it.
I still haven't seen it. Yeah, there we go.
Venom,
I'm sure
Venom,
it's
though?
a film.
I like Venom.
Venom. If we're going to include Venom, it'll be at the bottom place, so we can just sort of very briefly
I'll be
say
the bottom
that.
place, but I love it.
Okay, Josh. In a word,
Easy.
Venom.
Venom.
Owen.
Venom.
Thank you. And
Are we just going to start doing the Eminem song from the first movie?
Venom. Oh God.
Venom.
Didn't he do another version for Venom 2 when he like referenced 9/11 or something?
Carnage? Did he do
Yeah,
that? Did he
it's
do
sort of
that
something along those lines. But there was some
Yeah.
like controversy around it, and I listened to it and I thought, oh, this is shit. Anyway, yeah. So if you're this is sort of mess already. If you're not if you're not familiar with the panel review format here on Spill Your Beans, basically what we do is we've all got a list from worst to best of these films, and we're going to go through one by one. And when we've all mentioned the same film at least once, then we will discuss that film and review it and argue about how shit and or good it might be. So, because there's 8 films to get through here, so we'll just jump right into it with 8th place. Josh, what is your 8th place Spider-Man film?
I want to pretext this by saying I've just rewatched all of these from the very beginning.
Same, that's not an excuse.
Yeah, and I'm gonna make a bold claim that I don't think there is an unenjoyable Spider-Man film.
I would agree. If we're not including Venom, I'd agree.
Yeah, I feel. What have we got against Venom, man? Venom's fun.
It's not a good movie. It's not.
It's not. It's terrible. But I
really
really enjoy it.
But it's not good.
Very fun.
Academy Award nominee Riz Ahmed.
So yeah. Oh God. I had fun with all of these. The one I had the least fun with is The Amazing Spider-Man 1.
Oh,
Not 2.
Okay. Owen, what's your 8th place?
Okay, let's get the controversial picks out the way. Let's get the things that will get the Spider-Man stands on Twitter venomously attacking me, no pun intended. My 8th place is Spider-Man 2. The Spider-Man 2 of the Marvel Cinematic Universe Spider-Man films. Spider-Man Far From Home.
I think a little bit of poo came out there. I didn't like that. To be quite honest, that really put me on edge.
I mean, I feel like that's all actually undermined the hot take of you putting Far From Home.
Yeah, actually, that softened the blow a little bit.
It's still a hot take.
I thought if I go with something more controversial to start, by proxy, that will seem a bit less controversial.
Okay.
Fair enough, that's a good one. For me, mine is Amazing Spider-Man 2. It's a very normie opinion, but I genuinely, we'll talk about it when we get to it, I suppose. But obviously none of us have mentioned the same film there, so we're going to move straight on to 7th place. Owen.
My 7th place is The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Ooh. Okay. Josh, come on, bring it
Well,
home.
my 7th place is The Amazing Spider-Man 2.
Okay. Well, just for the record, my 7th place is Spider-Man 3. So I'm going to put that in there, and then we'll talk about Amazing Spider-Man 2. So I personally had only seen this once years ago. I watched it on a tablet, and then for the first ever time watching it on like TV.
How
recently.
all great films should be watched.
Yeah, that's
Yes.
how. That's how. Yeah.
Martin Scorsese would be so proud.
Martin Scorsese intended it that way. I was going to say that, but then I thought maybe that's implying that Martin Scorsese made Amazing Spider-Man 2, in which case I'd love to see that cut. This film is a bit odd, but like I didn't hate it, weirdly.
Yeah. So this is the one I kind of had the least. I'd watched the least recently, so I went back and watched it last night. Partly inspired by wanting to do this, and partly because my friend Griffin, who runs the channel Film Speak, recently put out a video essay how it's the perfect Spider-Man film, and you know, film is subjective and all that good stuff. And I love Griffin, but part of me was like, surely I'm missing something here. So anyway, I fired up Netflix and I watched Amazing Spider-Man 2 last night. I probably haven't seen it since I saw it in the cinemas in, was it like 2014 it came out?
Yeah.
Something like that. 20, yeah.
And yeah, I kind of feel the same way you do, George. It's like, I feel like there's quite a good movie within The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but the final product of the movie is kind of a fascinating mess.
Yeah, like I kind of got like the opening of the film and like the last half an hour of the film, like I really loved, genuinely. And stuff like the suit and the CGI is consistently pretty good, especially with Electro, who I don't know the design of, but like that the use of CGI in that, especially when like watching them in a bit of a marathon, you go, wow, like, compared to the older Spider-Man films, this just looks incredible.
Yeah. That was kind of one of my takeaways, like from a technical standpoint, in regards to things like costuming and cinematography, music. I really like the score for Amazing Spider-Man 2, the CGI, all the technical stuff is really, really great. I think it's my favourite Spider-Man costume. It's one of my favourite scores. I think the third act fight sequence is so well put together.
Definitely.
And there's a lot of really good performances in the film. I think, for me personally, we'll probably get into it as we go along, but actually in the suit being Spider-Man, I don't think anyone's nailed what I'd expect Spider-Man to be more than what Andrew Garfield was in this movie. I think his relationship with Gwen Stacy is one of the best kind of dynamics in any superhero film from like a romance perspective. And yeah, there's Sally Field's performance as Aunt May is tremendous. And there is a lot of really good stuff in this movie. But then there's also Jamie Foxx's Electro, everything Dane DeHaan done as Harry Osborn, and just a lot of really strange decisions.
Yeah, definitely. Where do you stand on it, Josh?
I don't think I could agree more with what you both said there. Yeah, I sort of feel like Owen said, like, I think half of this film is, I think it's just a film of extremes. I think half of this film is some of the best Spider-Man stuff that I've seen on screen, and half of it is just some of the worst as well. Like, again, I think I agree with the whole Spider-Man's characterization. I think is absolutely spot on, and I think Gwen Stacy is great. I just think everything around it just sort of drags it down. But now the more I think about, because this is probably the one that I struggled with placing the most. At one point I had this as high as 5th, and then I had it bottom, and then I had it 6th, and then I sort of settled at 7th, and I haven't moved it around since. But this is, I think it's really tight at the bottom for like its fine margins. But I did enjoy it. I really enjoyed watching it. And obviously it's the one I haven't got it bottom. But yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I completely agree with everything you guys have said, to be honest.
It's one of those ones for me where it's like, because I watched Amazing Spider-Man and Amazing Spider-Man 2 kind of back to back. I'd only ever seen them once in the past. You know, I grew up with the original Maguire Spider-Man films, and you know I love them. But the Garfield ones I'd only ever watched once and never really returned to. Now for me, and obviously we'll talk about Amazing Spider-Man in itself, but for me the original Amazing Spider-Man has a lot going for it in terms of story, but in terms of like aesthetic and visuals and characterization, I feel like it lost a few things. Whereas I feel like this film got a lot of the characterization spot on. As Owen said, I think for me the definitive version of Spider-Man is weirdly the one in the PS4 game. That's the one I'm like, that is Spider-Man. And if anyone can get that close to that, that's excellent for me. And Amazing Spider-Man 2, the thing that surprised me the most, going in expecting this to be dog shit, was Andrew Garfield, and I think he was absolutely stunning in this. Because I didn't hate him in Amazing Spider-Man 1, but I didn't get it too much. With this, the costume, the aesthetic, the joking around, like, he just becomes Spider-Man when he puts that suit on, and I absolutely adore it. I was going to ask...
Go on.
Yeah, I was going to ask, Josh, because I know you've put this above the original Amazing Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And me and Owen haven't. I would like to just sort of work that out, because for me, they were very similar, but it was very difficult. I kind of just had to do... What was the deciding factor for you, do you think?
The deciding factor was... What I think it was the characterization, to be honest. I think and I think you get this in Spider-Man, the original, and then you get in Amazing Spider-Man, you have to have this sort of snarky Peter Parker for a while. You have to have this, and I get why they do that, and I get why they did it. I just don't vibe with it as much. And then I turn this on, and I'm like, okay, yeah, I'm in now. Also, I mean, we'll get onto this more when we talk about Amazing Spider-Man, but I think Amazing Spider-Man 2, I think it just tries to do some different things with the character. I love all of the stuff. I love the whole through line of Spider-Man inspiring hope, and I think it nails New York as well. I think it's the most New York-y feeling. Maybe not as much as the Raimi ones, I don't know, but I just think they nail that hope. The stuff with the kid is just some of the. I think they're my favourite Spider-Man scenes, or maybe ever, but they're in probably one of the worst films.
So when you look like you disagreed there with that, I was.
Yeah.
The only thing I was going to say is, the only kind of point of contention I have there is Josh saying it's the most New York. Like, you remember the bridge scene from the first Spider-Man movie.
Okay, yeah. No,
the whole like.
I have to agree with Owen on this
you
one.
mess with all of us.
Yeah,
okay. That is like the first Spider-Man movie.
I think it nails New
like,
York. I think
No,
it
does.
gets
It does.
It does, but I think the
Raimi.
Raimi films. I think the one thing the Raimi films, and we'll get onto it, but the one thing I will say about the Raimi films is they had all those random people they definitely just interviewed on the street and asked them to react to something, and they're like, I don't know, it's just a guy. I'm just doing my job. It's just some guy. That's to me, that's New York.
Yeah, it's like.
But I do agree with
especially
you.
the first movie, the first of the Raimi trilogy, because it was like one of the big films set in New York that was kind of released post 9/11. It really has, like, it's so imbued with the spirit of that city, to the point where like, you know, the bridge sequence in the third act specifically, but just in general, I'd argue like it's up there with things like Ghostbusters as like one of the great Home Alone, as like one of the great New York films, the first movie. But to be honest, I agree to an extent. I think the Amazing Spider-Man movies do kind of make New York a big part of, make it almost a character in that film. I agree that I feel like we're veering into talking about the first movie now, but the scene with the kid on the bridge in the first movie might be my favourite live-action Spider-Man scene. Yeah, it's just, to me, like, that is, in like a 5-minute sequence, everything that character represents. Yeah, and I like its placement in that movie of, like you said earlier in that film, kind of Andrew Spider-Man is more of like an angry, snarky, you know, he's kind of a dick. He's not a really likable guy, and it's seeing the kind of hope that Spider-Man brings, and seeing it manifested in that child is kind of what makes him develop more into the character we know and we see in the second movie.
Yeah,
I think for me, my sort of deciding factor, before we move on, my sort of deciding factor between the placement of these two films, because they were very close for very different reasons. The deciding factor for me is, like, similar to Batman, is that for Spider-Man films, for me, are really focused on the quality of the villain. And Amazing Spider-Man 2, I don't think delivered that as much. Electro, as much as I like the aesthetic, I think the character and even the performance and just the effects they used with it and just the motivations just were so... and then obviously, you know, this Green Goblin and what the fuck they did with Rhino, like, what even... You know, it just... I know that the whole thing about Amazing Spider-Man 2 is, it's overcramped. For me, it's not that. It's not about them being overcramped because, you know, Spider-Man 3 did that, and of course, that's my 7th place pick, but at least with that, you still had some development of the characters in there. You still felt like they had their own motivations in some way, shape, or form. With Amazing Spider-Man 2, even with the main villain Electro, I think it hops too much. But with Amazing Spider-Man 1, for me, Lizard was the huge factor where I was like, this is actually miles better than I was expecting.
Right.
Yeah, look, I can't vote down a movie with a villain that wants to turn everyone into human lizards.
Yeah.
Simple as that.
Okay, maybe bringing up motivations was a bad point there.
I think
He
I
shoots
think
a
I'm
big
gonna
laser into the sky
and
wants to turn people into lizards. That is quality entertainment.
It's a mad plan. It's I think I'm going to have to come in with a bit of a hot take. I think I'm an electro apologist because
What do stands of Electro call themselves? Electricians?
Electricians. Yeah. No, I quite liked him. I mean, Green Goblin, Rhino.
Look.
But I mean, the performances. I don't know why I like it. If I'm honest with you, because I'm trying to think of a word to describe Jamie Foxx's performance, and post turning into Electro, I can only think of the word dull. But I just think, like you said, I really like.
I've never known someone get less lively after getting electrocuted.
Exactly. I mean,
well,
it also makes him cool, which is a bit weird. It also makes him.
Have you seen the Green Mile, Owen?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a reference and a half. I don't really know how it makes him, like, it gives him a haircut too, and it gives him a nice
his
cool
teeth as well.
Yeah, the teeth thing's so weird.
A cool fade and a dentist. But I don't know. I quite vibed with it. I quite liked it. See, I will get onto the lizard, but
I'm excited to see him in No Way Home. I'm excited to see him in No Way Home only because I think for a lot of it for me is the design. I can't lie. I think his theme was interesting in terms of the music and stuff. They did a lot with that, incorporating like a weird kind of dubsteppy, very bass heavy thing. Yeah. Whether it be with the music or the sound effects of like when he's shooting electricity and stuff. That was interesting to me. And I am excited to see him in No Way Home because I think a lot of it for me is the design. I don't like the fact that he's like all blue and stuff and it's like a black slim suit. I love the look in No Way Home. It's a lot more basic, but I'm excited to see how they do that and whether they explain that or whatever. I'm a fan of it. But yeah, no, I think it's one of those things, Amazing Spider-Man 2, where it's notoriously shat on, and although it is absolutely at the bottom of my list in 8th place, I do want to point out that it's actually not that bad.
Yeah, I don't think it deserves the hate that it gets.
Not a chance.
It really doesn't.
Yeah. It's actually a solid film in a lot of areas. It might have a lot like taking away from it, but what I will say is the characterization of Spider-Man particularly, and that Gwen Stacy death sequence, we haven't even touched upon that, is one of the best bits in any Spider-Man film for me. It's so moving, the music, the visuals of it, the way, in the clock tower, the way it builds up that suspense, that everything builds perfectly. And because of your history with Spider-Man films, this is the 5th live-action Spider-Man people have had in the last few years. You're expecting him to catch her and everything be all right. And I love the fact that it isn't. And even still, I can't deny that. No matter how exhausted I was with this absolute mess of a film by the hour and a half mark, I'm sat there, edge of my seat. There's certain moments in film and TV that make you rewatch it, and you're sort of willing it to change. Like, that's not going to happen. They're going to do it. And it's never going to change. But when a film creates that sort of resonance with an audience member, I think it does a good job, and that can't be taken away from it. That scene is brilliant.
Yeah, I do just have one last point that I want to make on the film as well. I do not care about Peter Parker's parents.
Oh yeah,
I could not care less. This is also something that goes for the Amazing Spider-Man as well.
Yeah,
I just don't care, and I think it takes away from Spider-Man as a character. I'm quite a casual fan. I'm not someone who's read all of the comics, but what I know about Peter Parker is that he's not Spider-Man because his dad was this big special scientist man.
That's it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, there's a famous Stan Lee quote where he talks about this, and he says about how it wasn't designed this way, but the thing he loves the most about Spider-Man is that, like, it can be anyone under the mask. Nothing's shown.
Yeah.
Doesn't matter what race you are, doesn't matter what age you are. Like, anyone could relate to being Spider-Man. The fact that he's this everyman, he's this sort of working class everyman kind of character. That's the point of this guy. And the fact that it was like, oh, the only reason him being bitten by a spider worked was because his dad had his DNA. And I was like, no, the one thing that Spider-Man is supposed to be, it could be anyone under the mask. And it could be this sort of like, he's supposed to be this everyman. By doing that, it's like, he's now special. He's now got special, he's like, and I don't really like that as much.
Yeah. That is kind of my biggest problem with Amazing Spider-Man 2, above all else. Like, there's a lot of little issues I have that I can kind of let slide. I think I actually quite like Dane DeHaan's performance when he's Harry Osborn, not so much when he's Green Goblin.
I don't know.
Though there is the scene where he invites Spider-Man and he's like, "I need your blood." I love that scene. It's like the great. It has my favourite line in cinema ever, which is when Peter Man is like, "I can't give you my blood." Peter Man, famous individual. Harry turns to him and says, "Your blood can't make me die more," which is chef's kiss.
The thing is, he's just, I think he's unbearable. And I don't believe for a single second that scrawny little man can beat up and incapacitate 2 guards of a fucking prison facility. Not a chance. So how, he just, I don't know what it is, but it's just not, when I look at it, that's just not Harry Osborn.
He just comes out of nowhere as well. Like,
where
were you?
Yeah, it's just a total retcon, isn't it?
Yeah. Baffling. I do think as well, the whole Peter Parker parents thing, though, the only bit of that I did like, and probably one of the best scenes in the film, was the one scene that got cut from the film, which is absolutely
100%.
infuriating.
Incredible scene. Love it.
A beautiful scene where Peter's dad comes back, and it's like, what? Oh, why did you cut that? That made everything in that film pointless, and now you've never completed the trilogy, and now it doesn't work because we never find out what the hell was going on. And it was a lovely little bookend.
I will say, when I was watching it and being familiar with that scene, every time I've watched that scene as a clip, I've been like, wow, I can't believe they cut this. This is incredible.
Yeah.
In terms of performance, in terms of acting, everything about that is brilliant. But when I will say, when I watched the film and it got to that scene in the graveyard, I'm like, they couldn't have put that in there. It just would have felt as good as the actual scene is. Might be a bit of a hot take. As fantastic as the scene is, in terms of fitting it into the film seamlessly, after the emotional resonance of Gwen's death and stuff, and how that impacts him as Spider-Man, and that ending where he comes back, I feel like it's a very, it's a very strange thing to add in there. As much as I love the scene in itself, I don't know. Odd one. It's a difficult one.
Maybe. My kind of issue with the use of Peter's parents in this trilogy is just, as someone that is a relatively well-read Spider-Man comic reader, Peter's parents have never been interesting, and any time they've tried to make them interesting, it's never worked. In the original comics, they were like covert Shield scientists, like secret agents for Shield. And in the Ultimate books, they were scientists who created the Venom symbiote. And they kind of like try and mash the 2 stories together in this movie. And it's like, the whole idea of like Richard Parker putting his own DNA in the spider and kind of inadvertently making the whole idea of Spider-Man as a character based around like destiny and lineage is like the kind of thing J.J. Abrams would do if he was making Spider-Man. And I really don't like that.
Yeah, it was very...
Like I said, it really takes away from like the everyman nature of the character and the idea that like you said, Peter Parker, any other day it could have been any other kid.
And that's the thing I like.
If he showed up 30 seconds later, it could have been literally just some other rando.
But that's
like Peter isn't special until he becomes Spider-Man. And when you kind of remove that, I think it does damage that characterization, which is so unfortunate because in every other facet of Peter Parker / Spider-Man, I think they nail it in this film.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. It's one of those really odd things that they just kind of threw in there, which I think they probably did because they wanted to do something different to the Raimi trilogy. But I think it's, in a sense, ironically, the one thing that actually failed them, because it's the one part of both of these films that is consistently just dull. I actually like the way they shot the opening scene with the plane. I thought that was pretty good. But as you say, there's nothing interesting in Peter's parents. And making Spider-Man, making him more special as this, like, it was always meant to be destiny kind of thing, really takes away from it. And I, again, as you say, Peter should be the everyman, and not having that really just sort of drags it. But yeah, no, I think we've talked about this film enough. So we will move on to the next place, which is sixth place. Yeah, so I think we've kind of talked all we can about that film. I think we've kind of summed it up in the best sort of way possible, touched on the key points. So I think we'll move swiftly on to our sixth place entry. So I'm going to start with Josh. What is your sixth place on this list?
God, this feels low, but I'm going to say it. It's Spider-Man.
Oh, okay. Owen, what's your sixth place?
I will take your Spider-Man and raise you one. The Amazing Spider-Man.
Interesting. I'm going to go with Owen on this and also say The Amazing Spider-Man.
Okay.
So we've now, I believe, all mentioned that film.
We have, yeah.
Let's talk about it.
It's kind of just a bit unremarkable, isn't it?
Yeah, I think it's one of those things.
It's kind of like the one that's just there.
The unremarkable Spider-Man.
The unremarkable Spider-Man. I love that.
It's like it's weird because I feel like this and The Amazing Spider-Man 2 have the opposite problems. Like, I think the basic story of Amazing Spider-Man 1 is really solid. Like, it has a good villain. The main characters are all really well written. But it's just kind of, it's like all the best parts about it, other than the fact that like Mark Webb directs it like it's a teen drama, which I think is a great way to approach making a Spider-Man movie. All the really memorable parts of it kind of feel like retreads of the Raimi films to me. In a lot of ways, like Rhys Ifans' Lizard, despite the fact I like him, kind of feels very reminiscent of Alfred Molina's Doc Ock. I love Martin Sheen's kind of portrayal of Uncle Ben, but again, it kind of just feels like they're trying to like step over and avoid redoing the same things from the Raimi films.
Yeah.
And then the stuff that they change, I don't feel like they change for the better. Like the film has a lot of like a grittier aesthetic, which kind of doesn't feel like Spider-Man to me. I'm not a big fan of the costume in this movie.
No, it's by far, I think, probably my least favourite Spider-Man costume.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. It's like, the end result is just a movie that's just kind of fine, I guess. Like, it's inoffensive, but it's kind of unremarkable.
It has some great bits in it, and it has some good ideas in there. And I think Andrew Garfield is still a good Spider-Man. Whether, and I don't really like his portrayal of Peter Parker in this, but I think that's more down to writing and characterization than it is to the performance.
Cool, though.
He's too cool. You know, like,
remember when he did the slam dunk with the basketball?
But does he wear? Am I right in saying this? But does he wear glasses before and after he gets bitten by a spider? Because it's one of the big things. Where he definitely doesn't and does wear it beforehand. Whereas the one thing about the Raimi films that I liked is that he did look kind of. And I'm saying this with three lads in a court all wearing glasses.
Be careful.
Bear that in mind. But the one thing is, he did kind of look a bit like a nerd, and then he got bitten, and then he like his eyesight was cured, and he was like buff and huge. And with this, I didn't really sense that much of a physical change to his character, which was one big thing for me. It was like, other than him diving about and like twitching like a crackhead half the film, like I can't really tell that he's being bitten by a spider here. Like, and I don't like. It's not very Peter Parker-y for me, where it's like, oh, he's investigating something and he's just went into like Oscorp or whatever it is, or to investigate it, and he's snuck into a secret room that his father did. I'm like, I don't know. It's just that doesn't feel very Peter Parker-y to me. He feels a bit too cool, a bit too clever. It's a good sequence, but it's a sequence that I would see after he's already become Spider-Man, after he's already got that confidence, that weight. You know what I mean?
It kind of like that scene in like particular where he gets bitten kind of summarizes that entire movie to me, where it's like they're retreading the same beats as the Raimi movie, but needlessly overcomplicating how they do it.
Yeah.
It's like, I think the biggest problem with this movie is the fact that like immediately after the Raimi trilogy, they went and did another Spider-Man origin story.
Yeah.
When there's only so many ways you can tell the Spider-Man origin story, it's pretty basic.
Yeah. I think with this film is it does have a lot going for it. I like I'd like what it tries to do, but you are right, it does retread a lot of familiar ground. Yeah, I think it again. I have my own sort of things. As I say, I really like the villain, despite the motivation side of things. But I do like the villain in this. I think, Lizard,
Like I said, I'll root for anyone that wants to turn me into a lizard.
I think there's something about it. Like I think I hated the idea of Lizard so much when I first watched it when I was younger, that when I came to rewatching it, I was like, okay, it's not that bad. And I'm a fan of the Lizard as a character. One bit of Spider-Man like nostalgia for me, like growing up, was this really obscure, but this like plug and play joystick Spider-Man game that I had on the TV. And there's a level in that which you're in the sewers with the Lizard, and it is the scariest shit. Honestly, like when I was a kid, terrifying, having the Lizard sort of jump up on you, and like the music was really creepy and eerie. And I had a lot of memory for that. The one thing I really wanted with this that we didn't get, I suppose, is I was really hoping the Lizard would have this sort of scary, more horror-focused angle than the other Spider-Man villains, to really sort of set him apart from what we already know from the Raimi films. We got some sewer stuff, we got some creepy stuff, but again, the one thing I did like in terms of motivation is, you know, why he becomes the Lizard. And, you know, it's just that experimenting and that fantastic shot, of course, of Dr. Connors with the glass, and you can sort of see both of his hands in the glass. I think that's beautiful, and it's so well done. But it feels like an idea they clearly wanted to try in the Raimi films, but never really got round to doing.
Yeah, I mean, because I like now is really my time to justify why I put Amazing Spider-Man 2 above this. It's because I think you've touched on it already. I've seen all of this before, and this is just the same stuff that we saw in Spider-Man, just not done as well. And the only real, like, fresh idea within it is the stuff with Peter Parker's parents, which I've already said I don't really like. So if the only really original thing in the film is something that I don't really like, and the rest of it is just retreads on things that I've seen done better, it just doesn't really hit home for me. And I'm not the biggest fan of the Lizard as a villain. I just think, again, I'm just not. I just don't find myself interested. I wasn't really interested while I was watching it.
I will say, like, this film has a lot of really good moments. We talked about the bridge sequence earlier with the kid, which I think is like, it sums up Spider-Man to a T. Yeah. Although it's very kind of Raimi-esque, the crane sequence in the third act I like a lot.
Love that, yeah.
I think, like, just like with the second one, Peter and Gwen's dynamic is like the one area I think it beats out the Raimi trilogy for me.
Definitely.
Is the kind of, it's the romance and like the believability that these are a real kind of teenage couple.
Yeah,
I think that's fair.
But again, it's one of those things with the characterization of Peter Parker that I believe that they already fancied each other before he became Spider-Man, which was never the case with the Raimi films. Is that there is supposed to be that transformation? You know what I mean? Like, he's always fancied her, but when he starts to be cool and when he starts to be Spider-Man and has this sort of confident air around him, he can't, and he has to make that decision. But it sort of melds into one in this, and I do like it. But then again, there are certain elements of this film that I absolutely hate. I like a lot of what it tries to do, and I think for me, a lot of my enjoyment out of this film and the placement on this list comes from a place of I was expecting it to be terrible, and was pleasantly surprised by the outcome. So yeah, I don't know. It's one of those ones where it's doing the same stuff again, like the origin story and all that sort of thing. But then it's got some strange like contrivances and plot points and stuff. Like when the Lizard finds the camera and it's got his name written on the back of it. It's like, just come on. If you're going to be able to sneak into Oscorp to that degree without like a pass or anything, and but you don't think to take your name off the back of your camera that you're leaving in the sewer with the Lizard. Like, come on, man. Secret identity is the one thing. I know that's the same with all Spider-Man films. They always take their bloody mask off, but still, there's less stupid ways of doing it than this.
Yeah. I think as well.
I think if I ever
the action in this just does not grab me either.
No,
I think the
one thing I will
scene
say
is just doesn't do it for me.
I don't know. I actually, to be fair, I would say
I like the school
I
scene.
think the school scene works.
Yeah, it doesn't really.
I think the school scene's a pretty good set.
I think as well because of
great
the
Stan Lee cameo too.
I think the stand that is good.
That's the best bit. Yeah, that is the best bit of it.
I just think the thing with his tail coming off and stuff, and then it growing back, I really liked, and just I think the dynamic of it was interesting. This sort of like because you've never had the school invasion kind of thing before. Because by the time you get to the Raimi films, he's already out of school. So I quite like the idea of this physically like just this monster. It's not like somewhat like Dr. Octopus. He's got big arms and whatever, and he can do stuff. Green Goblin's just a terrorist, basically. With the Lizard, he's just like a very classic kind of monster. He's just a monster, and he's running around scaring people and killing people. And I quite like that because it's sort of like that fits the. I don't know why that fits the school aesthetic really well. The one thing I do wish is that it was after hours or something, and you could have had it at night. Because that could have been some really alien-esque stuff, but that would
have been so much
should have.
This is my passion of like the.
They should have set this sequence during a parents' evening.
Yeah. Oh yeah, they definitely should have.
That would have been great.
Because it's like this is the thing with me, and again I've mentioned it before with the Lizard, is because of my nostalgia growing up and my connection with the Lizard has always come from that sort of terrified, like anxious feeling around this like monster character villain. I would love to have seen them gone into a really horror focused angle with this film, and with that grittier aesthetic, they almost had it. They just missed the mark by like that much, and it's just like
I think as well.
Yeah.
I think setting it in a parents' evening as well is a great idea because it adds. I feel like the best Spider-Man fights have a nice little extra threat level, and I think having Aunt May and Captain Stacy in the school would have been. Just added an extra little bit of threat where Peter's trying to keep his identity at the same time as trying to fight the Lizard.
Exactly.
And that would have just made the fight a little bit more interesting.
Yeah.
And
you could always have
the one thing I will say about Kurt Connors. Sorry, the one thing I would say about the portrayal of the Lizard is, I think when he's actually Kurt Connors, I think Rhys Ifans does a tremendous job. I like the idea of presenting him and like his duality with the Lizard as almost like a Jekyll and Hyde kind of character. But like you said, like especially with the kind of darker aesthetic and like the tone to it, they really could have leaned into like the Lizard is this kind of like alien-esque monster, which come to think of it, is kind of a bit of a missed opportunity. I don't massively hate what they did. I think
it would have been different to what we'd seen in the Raimi film.
Yeah, exactly.
Because I think what we see, I do like the Jekyll and Hyde thing, but we've seen that quite a lot.
Yeah,
in the Raimi
that's kind of Willem
well.
Dafoe's Green Goblin.
Yeah, basically. And you get a little bit of it with Doc Ock as well. You get a little bit of it with... you get a bit of it with Peter as well in Spider-Man 3. But yeah, I just think it is so unoriginal, I couldn't put it any higher.
I think for me as well, and again, I'm quite passionate about this, and I think a lot of people have made this point about the Lizard's design as well. For some reason, the design on most of the villains in these two films are just ass. Like, they just do not look very good. And I really do like certain aspects of the Lizard's design, but he looks far too human. And they just give him the lab coat. Just do the famous lab coat thing.
I was about to say,
film,
my favourite Lizard is like the one from the 90s cartoon where he's kind of got like a bit more of like a crocodile alligator face and the tattered lab coat.
Yeah, that would be so much cooler.
Give me the lab coat.
Because he is this sort of scientist kind of character.
All I'm asking
it's a great little thing to do. But making it, I think the weird thing about it, even though he's supposed to be like a lizard, he looks too human to be a lizard. So then to not give him any clothes feels really
like
naked, and I don't like that. It does though. That's the kind of
looks like
mix.
Have you ever seen the live action Super Mario Brothers movie?
Have I? Oh, have I?
You have.
Oh, have I?
Know you
So
have.
he looks like one of the Coopers in that
He
film.
does actually, yeah.
He looks like King Cooper, and I can't unsee it.
Yeah, that's a fact.
God.
Oh, God. Yeah, that's a good point. I hadn't even thought about that. That's disgusting. Is there anything else you guys want to say before we wrap up Amazing Spider-Man? Because I don't think there's anything
Not
too much
really.
to say.
No.
Uncle Ben dies over milk.
He does, but there is no point crying over spilt milk.
Milk.
So
No, there's no point dying.
there's
over
no
spilt
point
milk.
dying over stolen milk.
I like the bit where Peter's talking to Gwen and Uncle Ben says, he's got you on his computer.
And she doesn't freak out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the most
Well,
unrealistic
I mean,
part of the
in
entire
Amazing
film.
Spider-Man 2, he literally admits to stalking her and she doesn't freak out then. She's just like, oh, thanks.
That's a Spider-Man trope at that point. I don't know. We'll get into that with the Raimi films, I
Yeah.
suppose.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. In which case, I think we can move on to 5th place and jump ahead to that. Owen, what is your 5th place entry onto this list?
Okay, so now we're getting into the territory of all the Spider-Man movies that I at least genuinely like. So we've kind of gone through the 3 that I'm kind of ambivalent towards.
Yeah.
And now we're getting into the ones I think are at least relatively good. And is this a hot take to say that I think this movie's relatively good? My number 5 is the 2007 Sam Raimi directed American motion picture, Spider-Man 3.
Good choice. Good choice. And Josh, what is your 5th place entry?
Mine is also Spider-Man 3.
Very good.
Wow.
Mine is the original Spider-Man, directed by Sam Raimi.
Okay.
I think Owen's like prepping to
Interesting.
kill us both.
No, you are not happy with that.
Yeah. So
our
the first thing I
Spider-Man
want to
placing,
really
are
address
you?
with that is obviously I think avoiding all the stuff that's already been said about this film that can be said. I want to really get into the nitty gritty.
It's great.
But Josh, you put this above the original Spider-Man film with.
Yes.
Okay, can you explain why?
You really like musical
I feel
numbers.
like I had loads of arguments available and ready to go, and now I'm here. I'm like, can I justify this?
No, go for it. I want do it. I want you to try.
It is a tad better, I think. I love Spider-Man. I love Spider-Man 1. It is great. It's really, really fun. It's the most 2002 thing I've ever witnessed in my life. It's actually the first film I ever saw at the cinema.
The song for the movie is sung by Chad Kroeger from Nickelback. It can't be more of a time capsule from
beautiful.
2002.
Yeah. Spider-Man 3, I went into it and I was like, this is 100% going to be bottom of my list, and I'm really not going to like this. And I just had the best time.
It's so funny.
Ever.
It's so funny.
It is so funny, and I would argue that it may be the worst film on this list, but it gets 5th just because I had so much fun with it. I just have to put it all there. As from a filmmaking perspective, it is okay. From an enjoyment perspective, it is absolutely shit hot.
There's a couple of things. Sorry, Owen. Just before, because I want to throw this in before I forget what I'm going to say. But it's a thing for me where it's like there's 2 things. One of it is, as you say, from a filmmaking perspective, it's fine. But I also would think this is shocking that this is what stopped them making any more and continuing to Spider-Man 4. Like, this is the one. Like, it's not that bad. It's still pretty decent.
It's really not.
It's consistent with the other 2, at least. And the other thing I would say is this film, for me, despite it being 7th on my list, it has the Revenge of the Sith effect with me, where it's a film that isn't critically very good, but you just wait for the memes and the funny bits, and you have a whale of a time. If you're talking about, is this a good film? Are you talking, is this a film that entertains me for 2.5 hours? Then yes, it does. It does, because I'm laughing my tits off for about half this film. And you can't knock it for that. It's more of a comedy in some aspects than it is a serious film. But yeah, no, I think that's where I stand on it.
Yeah.
Can I make a really kind of hot claim
Go
here?
on, go for it.
Yeah.
Treat yourself.
Other than Sam Raimi giving us like the first ever portrayal of Spider-Man on screen, which is like an incredible achievement to like make that character work and be believable on film, I think there is no other Spider-Man movie that is like shouldn't that works more than it shouldn't than Spider-Man 3. I think in the hands of any other director than Sam Raimi, this might be one of the worst movies ever made.
Yeah.
But because it's Sam Raimi, he somehow sticks the landing and makes it quite a good film. Because, like, I kind of can't talk about this movie without being aware of kind of the context behind it, which was the disputes Raimi was having behind the scenes with Sony about the direction of the film. It's very famous that Raimi didn't want to include Venom or the symbiote, and that was forced in by Sony. The whole kind of Venom arc feels a bit forced in the film. Not so much Peter having the symbiote, but the introduction of Venom as a character feels very shoehorned. You can kind of tell that Raimi wanted to not only kind of conclude Harry Osborn's arc that was set up so great in Spider-Man 2, but then also introduce the Sandman, who is, by the way, the single best part of this movie and one of the greatest comic book movie villains ever. But like, it's the fact that like Raimi has to not only juggle all the plans he had for this original movie, as well as like concluding all of the character arcs and ideas set up in the last two movies, while also kind of having to cram in all this extra stuff that, by all accounts, he didn't want to do.
Yeah.
Like, we've seen Amazing Spider-Man 2 try and juggle too much, and unfortunately kind of fumble the ball to the point where it's like, there's kind of enjoyable scenes, but as a movie, it's not particularly watchable. Like, is Spider-Man 3 as good as the other two? No. Is it still a very enjoyable movie with a lot of great moments? Yeah. And I think that, like, given the circumstances, that's a massive testament to how good of a director Raimi is. That he kind of pulls it off and makes it not an absolute steaming pile of shit.
For me, the one thing I will say about this film that really doesn't rub off well with me is there's a couple of things. First of all, that the film is quite a bit longer than the other two, in the sense that with the amount of villains and with the amount of story points going on, it really drops the ball in a few areas. Like, I don't think it's just the fact that, like, again, Sandman's a brilliant villain. But then, like, when he rocks up at the end with the whole, like, Eddie Brock thing, I'm like, oh, he's in this film?
For, like, a good chunk
forgot
of the
he's
film.
even in this film.
Yeah.
But also, I think there's a weird sense of, like, why did the Mary Jane story arc need to be in this? The whole thing of him, like, because Peter's a dick in this film. Before he gets the symbiote, like, what was he doing kissing Gwen Stacy on stage, like, with that famous upside down kiss? Like, there is no logic to that, and there's no comeuppance to that. Like, he doesn't click that that's wrong. And part of me likes the way they do that in this film, because obviously Spider-Man 2 starts off in a place where Peter has, kind of, he's a bit out of it. He's not really doing too well. He's Aunt May's having to go to the bank to try and get money to keep the house and stuff. He's not with Mary Jane. He's only just becoming Spider-Man. Whereas at the beginning of this film, everything's going right, and I really like that thematically. But they've used this sort of thing where it's like, oh yeah, everything's going right, so now he's going to be a dick and not notice when things are good. No, I still think it's the one thing that's inconsistent with Peter's character in this is how he treats Mary Jane. And a lot of people go, oh, Mary Jane's just a bitch in this film. I'm like, actually, now that I'm older and I'm watching this, I'm like, she is a little bit, but I don't think like Peter's being the fucking hero either. I mean, he's great as Spider-Man, but as Peter Parker, I think he's a bit of a dick.
I mean, Peter literally backhands Mary Jane at one point in this film.
That is awful.
Literally that.
That is an awful moment.
Like, he literally lays his hands on her at one point in this film.
Yeah.
Let's not treat him like a saint,
I think
regardless of symbiote or not.
I think it would have been improved if, like you said, like, you lean more into the Peter Parker down on his luck, like a lot of like misunderstandings happen or something, and like some stuff that Peter does with good intentions like ends up blowing back in his face. I think that's a much more Spider-Man-y way to do it than Peter's a dick for a bit, but then he realises he was a dick, but then he gets more of a dick because of the symbiote, and then he's like, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not a dick anymore.
They sort of tried to do that with this film, though. They tried to be like, oh, he's just so happy, and he's going to propose to her, and that's all he's thinking about. Like, in his head, they're already married, so like kissing someone else, even for like a public thing because he's Spider-Man, it doesn't really matter. But it's like, because there are certain things in this.
That's not how marriage works, by the way.
Yeah, it's absolutely not. But there's ways and means you can go about it. Like, but they didn't. And there's even, I will say there are stuff that it is a bit weirdly unrealistic when, like, MJ's talking about her stage performance. It's like, this person's seen it 5 times. This person's seen it 7 times. Like, Peter has not got the money. And realistically, like, who is seeing your play like 6 or 7 times? I mean, that's mental in itself. Get them checked out.
Yeah.
It's like there's certain things. Like
Peter just read the reviews and just was like,
no,
nah.
no thanks. Yeah, apparently the lead's really shit. But it's like even that thing where she gets like sacked from her like stage play. It's like, how is, obviously we know that and it's a bit awkward, and it's maybe that's just good screenwriting. But like the fact that she uses that to take it out on him is a little bit like, I know he's being a dick, but that's the one thing. You know, maybe like just the way he's treating you generally and the fact that he kissed this other girl, maybe that's the thing you should be angry about more than the fact that he wasn't aware about this thing that happened because you didn't tell him and there's no other way he could have known. Just a thought.
Yeah.
Just a minor
that
thought
basically
there.
causes the entire third act of the film, which, you know, it just causes, like, just have a chat, guys.
Yeah. It's
Just
a
chat.
weird.
Just
It
talk
is
it
a
out.
really weird one, and I think because every film,
What this film needed was a couples therapist. That's what this film needs, and then nothing bad would have gone wrong, and everyone would have lived happy ever after.
I think the one thing I don't like about
There
it
we
is it does mix too much. Like every one of these Raimi films does bring MJ into it too heavily, I think, and the relationship stuff is half of the film, and I don't mind that. Like in Spider-Man 1 and 2, it does work, but in here, it's like, okay, we're doing this again. Like, they have to have problems just because there needs to be drama here. It's like, there's already enough going on in the film. I feel like they could have had an okay relationship with a few little minor things gone wrong without it being this huge part of the film, which would make the breakup, the fake up, if you will, caused by, like, Harry Osborn, maybe that would have a bit more impact, I feel, if it was sort of left to them not arguing the whole film. Because it would have been really out of nowhere and like, wait, what? There's just a few things in this film. I think because Spider-Man 1 and 2 have so much going for them, in my opinion, you know, even if it's cheesy as frig, like, it has a lot going for it, and they are consistent and tightly wrapped stories. Spider-Man 3 isn't that, and I think it drops the ball a little bit, which makes it feel more disappointing. But actually, it's not that bad of a film. It's probably a bit too cheesy. It's like, it's just got to the limit where it's like, yeah, if you'd done this like a year or two later, it just would not have worked. Like, the cheesiness like works just about 2007, but you couldn't really push it further past that. And that's fine. You know, I love this film for what it is. It's a lot of fun. And, you know, if you want one to just sit and get drunk with and, you know, have a laugh at, this is the one.
Yeah, I had an absolute hoot with this film. I just think, yeah, it is far from flawless. But it's just so much fun. Like you said, it is chock full of memes. You know, you've got Peter dancing. You've got every single moment that James Franco is on screen, because he is
So
hands
good.
down the worst, but sort of the best part of this trilogy.
Yeah.
So good.
So good.
So
good.
So
So good.
Yeah, so I just think, it's just stupid, innit? But it's fun.
Fair enough.
That's my review.
Owen, have you got any closing thoughts on Spider-Man 3?
I will say, I kind of, stupid but fun is probably the best way to describe this movie. I will say that as an arc, I love what they do with the Sandman in this film.
Yes.
The sequence at the end where you get the flashback to Uncle Ben's death is just like, literally, just thinking about it just makes me tear up.
Yeah.
I love like the parallel between him and Peter both kind of accidentally becoming villains and kind of being forced to atone for that together is a really interesting choice. I like how both of the lead, like 2 of the 3 villains kind of get a redemption. Both, like Peter gets his redemption from kind of his turn, but then you get kind of Harry dies a hero, Sandman gets his redemption arc, and the only one that doesn't is Venom, which is great because Eddie Brock's kind of so consumed by hate and rage, he kind of can't let go of that. I also love the fact that the scene in the Daily Bugle where kind of Brock gets outed for faking the photos and Peter tells him to get religion. The next time you see Brock, he's in a church asking
I
God
never
to kill
noticed
him.
that. I never clicked on that like, little comment.
That
when I
is,
first
like,
thought about it.
incredible
Oh, he did actually
writing.
take his advice. That's sweet.
I never
Like,
noticed
that's how
that.
much of a
That's the first
bonehead
time I've
Eddie
noticed
Brock
that. That's
is.
great.
Yeah, I
love
think
that.
Like, he takes it so literally.
a bit of a hot take thing on the Sandman thing, right? I do like what they did, but I don't like the retcon. of him being thrown into the mix.
See, I think I'm
I like it.
like in idea I don't like it, but in execution I think it really works.
Yeah.
yeah,
like,
it
I'm
seems-
surprised how
seems
much
really
I like it.
superficial
They did manage to do it, but
when you say it.
But I think when I'm watching it, I'm just like, especially when I watch them all sort of back to back, I was kind of like, it doesn't gel as well as I was hoping. And as much as I want to really like it, I'm just like, I don't know. This is kind of But there's certain things that work for some people and there's certain things that don't. And I think that for me, the Sandman stuff I think is gorgeous and his own personal stuff is beautiful. When you tie
the
it,
effects really hold up as well.
Yeah.
Like for 50,
Yeah, they do.
15 years
Considering-
ago,
yeah.
it is.
Oh,
looks
yeah.
so good.
It's
if you release
phenomenal.
that today, I genuinely wouldn't bat an eyelid.
Yeah.
It looks
Yeah.
great.
Like the sequence where he, like, after he has the transformation, he's kind of trying to grab his
That's one of my
daughter's
favourite moments
that,
in the film.
and then the scene where he fights Spider-Man and he comes out of like the truck, like the effects, like this is a movie from 2007 and it still looks great. Like that's impressive.
I think there's certain things where it's like, well, then you say that, and then you go to the opening fight between Peter Parker and New Goblin, and I think that looks like ass. So I think there's certain areas where the
one
CGI
thing
budget could have been a bit higher.
One thing that's always really annoyed me about this movie is the costume they give to Harry
Terrible.
Osborn. Why is he a snowboarder?
I don't know.
Why is he a snowboarder?
But then you could say, I think
the Willem Dafoe suit from the original movie is so good, and like Spider-Man 2 ends with him finding that. So why does he? Like, just put him in that
I don't know.
costume. That costume's fine.
It's a weird one. I think it's one of those things. But then I would say the same thing about Venom. I think Venom's terribly designed in this, whether it comes to the voice or the style of it. Like, it's too.
You only see
scrawny.
the actual Venom for like 30 seconds as well. I couldn't tell you what Venom looks like in this film because
I love the bit where he meets Sandman and he's crawling on the wall and he's like, looks like we both want to kill the spider.
Yeah, why is
it's
he?
such a
I
weird
hate
voice.
how he talks like that.
Such a weird voice choice.
Yeah,
Like,
it's mad.
I actually
It
think
just
as
sounds like
Eddie Brock,
Chad.
Topher Grace is pretty fun, but yeah, Venom just doesn't work.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah, it's a dodgy one. But I think on that note, I think we've covered basically everything, bar touching off the obvious stuff. Spider-Man 3 is hilarious, a bit misjudged, but a lot better than people make out to be. So, yeah. On that note, we're about sort of. Are we on like fourth place now? I think we are on fourth.
Yeah,
fourth
we are
place.
on fourth.
So, Josh, what is your fourth place pick?
My fourth place is another one that Owen will hate me for. It is Spider-Man: Far From Home.
Interesting. Owen?
I put that bottom.
I know you do.
I just want to.
Oh yeah, no, I know. I remember. I remember. I'm going to
is-
shout to you when I get to mention it in my list.
My number 4 is the prequel to Spider-Man: Far From Home, Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Interesting, because my number 4 is also Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Nice.
So I feel like we've mentioned.
Okay.
Let's talk about Spider-Man:
I
Homecoming.
don't know if we can yet. I don't. Josh hasn't mentioned it. Have you?
No, we can't. I have not
We haven't.
mentioned it.
So-
Spider-Man
Okay.
Homecoming yet.
Okay.
We'll shift straight on to
Oh,
third
does mean we have to
place.
talk about Far From Home?
Third place.
No, because George
I haven't
hasn't
mentioned it yet.
Far From
I haven't
Home
mentioned
yet.
it yet. Third
Okay.
place. We'll start with Owen. What's your third place?
My third place is the 2002 original one that started it all. Spider-Man.
Okay. Josh, what's your number 3?
Mine is Spider-Man: Homecoming.
Interesting, because mine's Spider-Man: Far From Home, which means we can talk about all 3 of these films before moving on.
My head hurts.
Right. Why do? I mean, I feel like we should get Spider-Man done
Yeah.
because then we've gone a nice little chunk of Raimi, and then we can sort of tackle
Okay.
Homecoming and Far From Home.
Yeah.
I mean, George, this is your podcast.
No, feel
so
free.
I'm taking
Take over, Josh. It's fine.
You go. Spider-Man,
Josh,
I
tell me
feel
about
like-
Doctor Who.
Yeah. Spider-Man, I feel like I now have to justify myself because I put this third from bottom.
Yeah, that is
yeah,
a
that's
scene bad.
mad.
I
That's if
just
you're-
want, I just
that's
want
if
to
you're
tell
being
you
a
that.
pessimist, but it's sixth. Like
This movie is
and I would
amazing.
say
Yeah,
this
to be
is
fair, mine's only 5th.
this is the first. This is exactly. You're only one place above me. I think it's really good. Like as I said at the beginning. You know, some films have got to come near the bottom, and I love this film. As I said before, it's the first film I ever saw at the cinema. I have a deep connection to this film. I rewatched it and I just didn't vibe with it as much as I have done previously.
Yeah.
I think my main gripe, I have to say, with this film, even though there is a lot to love about it, is the editing is so all over the place. I don't.
I love it.
I'm not a fan. Do you like it? I feel like it depends on where you come from as a Spider-Man fan. And I don't know. I feel so bad. I feel like I need to hate on this film because it's 6, but I really love it.
I'm only a
that's
spot
pretty much
above
my
you.
only gripe, to be honest.
And I get it. For me, this film is all over the place. It is by far the cheesiest Spider-Man film to date.
It's so cheesy. It's painfully cheesy.
It's so cheesy.
I love how cheesy this movie is.
It's definitely, it's one of the best. It's always the one. Similar to Spider-Man 3, but in a different sense to Spider-Man 3 slightly, because it is a better film. I do feel like I could just watch this no matter what. And most of that is down to Willem Dafoe as Green Goblin, who I absolutely adore in this film. I think he's brilliant. Every time that man opens his mouth, whether it be this film, whether it be The Lighthouse, whether it be Mr. Bean's Holiday, it's always a phenomenal performance, and I always love it. And it's always a lot of fun, for either the best or worst reasons. This man, every time he talks, is brilliant. And to be honest, he's the thing I'm most excited about in No Way Home, to be quite honest with you guys. That's the thing. I'm like, I cannot wait to see this man as Green Goblin again.
Yeah.
Can I just say, like, 5th, 6th? What about my generous proposal? Despite the fact both of you guys said you like this movie, I now feel like I'm in the position to defend it.
You don't, but you don't need to.
This movie is.
You don't need to defend it.
You don't
I'm
need
going
to
to
defend it because we both love
I'm
it.
going
love
to.
it.
Okay, defend it.
I feel like I need
against
to.
2 people who have just actively said they like this film. Go on.
It should be pretty easy.
Yeah.
This movie is unbelievably cheesy.
Yeah.
Objection.
That's
Your
what I
Honour.
love about it.
Can't object to that, to be quite honest with you.
I'm joking. It is the cheesiest thing I've ever seen.
Tobey Maguire's portrayal of Peter Parker in this movie is like the closest thing we've ever got to anyone doing Christopher Reeve's Superman, and I love that about it.
Yeah.
This movie is like such a homage to like that era of comic book films, and especially an era where like you got to remember, like I would make the argument that without Sam Raimi's Spider-Man, you don't get Iron Man and you don't get the MCU, both in terms of just like the tone of this movie and also like the groundbreakingness of it in terms of making a superhero movie that's not ashamed to be a superhero movie. Because like I know the X-Men movies and Blade came before that, but they kind of strip everything superficial and like fantastical away and just like throw them in black leather, and they take the piss out of having superhero names and villains and all that stuff. This movie is like, no, comic books rule. Spider-Man is awesome, and I'm going to make the most Spider-Man movie ever.
Yeah.
And like, Willem Dafoe is incredible.
He is
Every
actually
line he
excellent.
says
I
is
know
just,
everyone sort of
like gives me serotonin.
It's always like a joke, isn't it? It's like, I'm something of a scientist myself. But like, I think he's like.
But no, that's it.
But
he manages to be a meme and
yeah,
also amazing at the same time.
That's it. And I think he's actually so intimidating and like the scenes with the mirror when he's just talking to himself. It's like, how can he do both of those so well?
It's like as well, the Thanksgiving scene is one of my favourite
Although I will
scenes in
say,
the movie.
despite the fact that that Thanksgiving scene is brilliant, the bit where Aunt May just smacks Norman's hand away and he just looks at her makes me cackle every time because it's so unnecessary for him to be looking at Aunt May like that. Like, why?
I just think I owe it to our listeners, to your listeners, and the people listening to this podcast, to not brush over George's Norman Osborn impression there, because I now need to see a cut of Spider-Man where Norman Osborn is played by Waylon Smithers from Simpsons, because that is exactly what just came out of your mouth.
Look, I'm no John Coleshaw.
Everything
right?
I've
I'm
ever
not
wanted.
a John Coleshaw. I'm not an impressionist. I'd never claim to be. But what I can do is a fairly inaccurate Willem Dafoe impression.
Back to formula.
Hello, Norman Osborn. You're quite good at turning me on.
We're not so different, you and I. Stop laughing at it. It's not that bad. It's not that bad. Just want you to hear my
It's
Chris
not,
Eubank.
It's not. It's not that bad.
Oh God. Right, I think.
Sorry, I just had to call that out. I had to.
So yeah, with the original Spider-Man, that was not clean at all, was it? No one's ever going to be able to tell there was a cut there between us cackling with laughter and my impression to. And yes, what did you think about Spider-Man? No, I think it's one of those ones that is. There's not really much I want to say about this before we move on. I think it's one of those ones where it's the perfect origin for Spider-Man. It works incredibly. It's got a fantastic villain. Whether it is cheesy, it's really. I love even the bit where Willem Dafoe is like dressed up as an old woman in the burning building just to give him a scare with like a stock scream sound effect. I just love it. I love bits like that where it's like it is cheesy. Like the big ultimatum of the film is the Green Goblin hanging MJ on one arm and a box full of children on the other.
Not enough movies do that anymore.
Yeah.
Not enough movies threaten to
do.
throw children off a high platform. We need more of that. It feels like a bygone era.
Yeah. And that's what I love about this. It is cheesy, but it doesn't apologise, and it is absolutely fully accepting of it.
It's so endearing and so like earnestly a superhero movie in a way. Especially at the time, a lot of superhero movies weren't. It just like doubled in the same way. I kind of feel the same way about this as I do about films like Aquaman, where like it just doubles down on how bafflingly silly the concept of it is.
Yeah.
And just is like, just trust me, it's stupid, let's go with it. Though I think it's a far better movie than Aquaman. One thing we haven't touched on that I want to, there's a lot of like really serious moments. The car scene with Peter and Uncle Ben breaks my heart. The scene where Peter's talking to MJ in the garden after she's had like the fight with her dad. But Bonesaw, man. How great is Bonesaw? He's got you for 3 minutes.
I got you for 3 minutes
of playtime. It's an amazing.
I got you for 3 minutes of playtime.
Also,
he's fantastic.
Bonesaw is ready.
Me and Owen did chat briefly about Spider-Man a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
And the one thing that I mentioned is just I wish I was behind the scenes on this film when somebody decided to spend, was it over 100 takes on Tobey Maguire trying to catch all of the things on that tray, and he actually did it in real life.
Who
funded this film?
Amazing.
They need people on set to control them, because if
like
I walked in,
Stanley Kubrick does Spider-Man.
If I walked in and I was funding that film, and I walked in and I heard like take 128 on Tobey Maguire catching some milk on a tray, I would say, why am I spending my money on this? I'm really glad they did it, and the fact that he did it, but I just wonder. I just think why?
Was it worth it? Because realistically, it really wasn't.
It's really funny that everybody thinks it's a special effect. They don't really make it very clear that it's practical. Yeah. So all of the painstaking hours that went into making it practical are useless, because everybody who doesn't know this fact actually thinks it's a special effect.
Yeah,
which is hilarious.
That's the thing, though. That's the thing about this is what I really love is so it's just another part of this again, talking about the cheesiness side of it. Kind of wrapping this bit up is the extras in this film. It's been talked about before, but my God, when you've rewatched this film a couple of times and you can start looking at the people in the background who like, and the people who are listening on audio won't get the benefit. So if I ever upload this on TikTok or YouTube, you'll get the benefit of this. But half of them are like in the background. Something very minor will happen, like Green Goblin will just punch Spider-Man in the face, and the background extras will just be going like, like what, freaking out over the most minor things. There's a guy like. And this continues through all of these films. But my God, in this film, it's the festival thing where there's like so much going on, and there's so many people in the background in like random costumes as well. I'm sure there's like a chef that runs past at one point. I'm like, what the fuck's there a chef there? It's like the Muppet Show, but it's brilliant in its own right, and I think it's something that like again really adds to it, where it almost feels like a farce, but in the perfect way, because it is a good film, but it's also hilariously cheesy. So it's a really easy watching film, and I love that.
Yeah, I also want.
But here's what I'll say with that.
Oh, go on, you go.
I just want to say this. Why can't cheesy also be good? Why does something have to be good but cheesy?
True.
It wears its heart on its sleeve. I think it's a wonderful movie.
That's very true.
And
actually. That's
one
very,
thing
very
I'll say with like what you're talking about with the extras, we'll get into MCU Spider-Man stuff in a little bit. But one of the things I really miss is that the perspective of everyday people in those movies. I feel like that's something we don't get enough of seeing how... It's something I think the first Avengers movie actually does really well, where you get like at the end after the invasion, you see like news reports of all these different just average Joes talking about the Avengers and everything that's just happened. Like that stuff feels ripped from the Raimi movies, and in this movie, like New York feels like a character, and so many random people who you only see for like a split second feel like their own characters. They don't feel just like extras stood there. They really kind of make the world feel lived in.
That's very true, and I love that. I love how it cuts between random people being interviewed, who genuinely probably are just people on the street of New York who were like, "Hey, do you want to be in a film? We'll like give you like $20 or something to like pretend you've just seen Spider-Man or something." And I will agree with you there. I do love that, and it is something that's missing from the MCU Spider-Man films. But obviously, I think it's a good segue into that. I suppose is that in terms of our rankings, we'll start with Homecoming because we've all kind of vaguely agreed on Homecoming. Like we've either got it like fourth or third or something.
Yeah, I've got it third.
So it's one of the ones that we kind of all on a similar level about, which we kind of haven't before, unless you're talking about the Amazing Spider-Man films. So I'm interested to see where you guys stand on that. Because for me, as much as I love the Raimi films and everything that tries to do and succeeds in doing, I think the MCU Spider-Man films, specifically Homecoming, work incredibly in their own right.
Mm-hmm. I think Homecoming definitely as... It's always hard with these two because you have to look at it as both. Does it work as a standalone film, and does it work slotting into the middle of this absolute tangled mess that is the MCU? Homecoming does both, which is why it's third for me, because I think on its own when I watched it, I just had so much fun with it. I think Tom Holland, I feel like people do lean into the whole, when comparing the Spider-Men, people lean into, there's a bit of a cliche of, Maguire is a better Peter Parker, but he's not a great Spider-Man, and Andrew Garfield is a better Spider-Man, but he's not a great Peter Parker. But I don't really agree with that. I think all of them do a good job at all of it. I don't think there's one of them that really messes up. I just think there's a really nice balance with Tom Holland's performance, where he does feel like at that perfect middle ground between a bit nerdy and a little bit cool, but sort of ironically cool. He sort of feels like
totally
right
agree,
in the middle of both. And I sort of feel like that with his Spider-Man as well. He's not too quippy, but he's as Spider-Man, he's really I think he's got some really funny lines, and
for me, with what Homecoming does is it introduces this new version of Spider-Man. It's a very unique perspective because it's the first in the trilogy, but we've also been introduced to him in Civil War. But I mean, combining those two, because he's not in Civil War very much. That's kind of his introduction on, like, it's almost like a showreel test kind of thing to be like, ooh, this could be...
It's kind of like the trailer.
With this, it's... The thing I like about this is you're not doing the origin story again. You have already done that. And the interesting thing as well is this could be a criticism as well, I suppose. I don't like how he relies so much on Tony Stark as his sort of benefactor, like that sort of thing about you're nothing without the suit, then why have it? But it's also why I love the fact that they take the suit away from him in this film, so he does have that final fight with his classic suit on, proving that, like, it isn't just about this high-tech suit. You had to have that for Civil War because it made sense, but giving him the original suit in this really that really works for me, conceptually and thematically. And I like as well that the idea that this isn't a definitive version of Spider-Man. He's already had his origin story, but this Spider-Man's origin, he hasn't had a big villain to fight immediately. he hasn't coincided with the creation of a villain like Garfield and Maguire did. Like, obviously Green Goblin happened like at exactly the same time as Spider-Man. It coincided exactly. And the similar sort of thing with the Lizard. With this, it's like, oh, you found out you had these powers, and then he's been running around really quietly helping out people, and he's appeared on YouTube a couple times, but he's mostly like, no one really knows who he is, other than the people in New York who are like, oh, that's interesting. I like the fact that he hasn't had a big villain until now, and this is when he defines himself.
Yeah.
The first film shouldn't have to be, this is how he becomes Spider-Man in terms of a physical sense, but how he becomes Spider-Man in terms of a thematic sense.
Yeah, I think I
agree really like that about this film.
I really like it as well, and it's just really nice to not. My biggest worry when I heard that they were bringing Spider-Man back was the idea of having to sit through another Spider-Man origin story when
I can't watch Uncle Ben die again.
I can't do it again. I was like,
that old man's been through enough. Let him rest.
Well, I mean, we now sort of know that they're going to go back and do some stuff with that animated show. Is that right? Am I right?
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. They're doing Spider-Man Freshman Year, which I'll admit I am quite excited for, because I think exploring it in an animated point of view is a really interesting one. What I hope they don't do is give him a big villain. That's the only thing I've got, is I hope they don't give him a huge villain in this show. Might make the show a bit boring, but in terms of thematical context, he becomes Spider-Man in Homecoming. Yeah. And I don't want to see fucking Venom appear in his freshman year.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because it wouldn't make any sense at all. Maybe a few hints to some characters, but not to that heavy-handed degree.
Mm-hmm.
I think with freshman year, you can kind of like throw in like a D-level villain. Like if the Shocker hadn't have been in Homecoming, someone like the Shocker would have been a good choice for that show. Just some random dude with a gauntlet.
Yeah.
That's just constantly trying to rob banks.
Mm-hmm.
But something along those lines would be perfect.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think, like, to summarise my feelings on Homecoming, I think it really has the benefit of not having to be an origin story. And, like, it doesn't suffer the same pitfalls that the first Amazing Spider-Man does, where it has to spend the first hour retreading ground that everyone knows. Yeah. It's like, right, Spider-Man's story, let's just jump into it. And also, like, getting that introduction to Civil War helps. I like what they do with the suit and the whole idea of, like, he's Spider-Man not because of the high-tech gadgets and the costumes, but because of the person he is and his, like, will and determination. That is, like, quintessential Spider-Man. I love the sequence where he kind of has to, like, lift the rocks and stuff, which is ripped straight out of an old Stan Lee, Steve Ditko comic.
Yeah. It's
and
something
Michael Keaton's amazing.
Yeah, Michael Keaton is absolutely phenomenal in this. On a mention of that, one of my all-time favourite Spider-Man scenes is the one where he's taking Peter Parker to the dance, and he's sat at the traffic lights,
amazing.
And you see him realising that reflection in the rearview window, and he's the rearview mirror, sorry. And he's like, good old Spider-Man. I'm like, that's such a... It hits brilliant. You. It's like, oh my God. And even I remember in the cinema, like the reveal of when he goes to the house and it's all upbeat, and then he sees, like, Michael Keaton. And it's such an amazing moment. They keep that held so tightly, and it works so well.
Yeah. I think it's beautiful in that I think Spider-Man is sort of one of the only, like, kind of superhero films where you could have all of these big budget fight scenes, and you can have the supervillains, and you can have all of this, but the most tense and impactful moment in the film is a meeting your girlfriend's dad, who just also happens to be the supervillain that you're currently fighting. But it just nails again. It's the whole Peter Parker Spider-Man life balance again that comes into play. But they do something a little bit different with it, and they do something really interesting and really tense in that scene, which is just so fun.
And I think the one thing I will say about this is it's a film conceptually in terms of its story that could not be made in any other context. You couldn't see this done in the Raimi universe, because all the Webb universe is Mark Webb. Was that right?
Mark Webb. Yeah.
I just thought I'd made a right tit myself. The Webb universe. But I think it's one of those ones that, because of the context of the MCU, I like the fact that they didn't just go, oh, we'll just do another Spider-Man story. And that's one thing I do like about these films, and it does venture into Far From Home as well. So I'm interested to see what Owen has to think about this, because I feel both of these films are very similar in terms of quality and stand-in. And I struggle to pick between the two. You're shaking your head already. But for me, I think the one thing I really like about this is that it couldn't be made in any other universe because you had to have had that introduction in Civil War. It couldn't do the origin story, but it also wouldn't work as a second film. It's a first film of a trilogy story that couldn't be done as a reboot with its own origin. Like it works as is, and I think that's perfect. Even the inclusion of Tony Stark being that sort of parental figure, because you need that parental figure, but you also don't want to do the origin story. Perfect.
Yeah.
And then we obviously venturing into Far From Home, having Tony Stark's death be almost similar to that of the Uncle Ben death in terms of thematic resonance, that he has something to fight for or to live up to almost, I think is interesting. But I can see Owen's face twitching. Do we want to venture into Far From Home? Is there anything else you want to say about Homecoming? Or
I like Homecoming a lot. I just feel like I need to get that in there before people brand me an MCU Spider-Man hater. Homecoming is genuinely
I think
a really great movie.
Yeah, I think we're now in the territory of, I think there's sort of three tiers to this, where I think the two Amazing Spider-Man films I quite liked, but there's quite a lot of flaws there. And then you've got like the mid-level ones, which I like and I really enjoy as films. And then this top three is just the absolute gold standard for me. And Homecoming does just fall into that. So
then we go into Far From Home, and so for me and Josh, like it's at the same sort of level, just sort of flipped round. So Josh, your Far From Home was fourth,
yeah,
and mine was third, and we're the opposite for Homecoming. So I feel like we're both in sort of similar agreement here, where it's like these are both pretty consistent films in terms of quality, story, and the one man who disagrees with that, Owen, you've got your Far From Home at 8th.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I'm fascinated, and I've been fascinated since we started this recording.
It's actually look, I have a kind of internal mantra on my channel that I try not to shit on things. Like any sort of like criticism I have, I want to kind of do it in a constructive and a healthy way, in a way where we kind of like still appraise something and kind of take the hood off and look at, okay, this isn't, if I don't like something, why? What lessons can we kind of learn from it? Far From Home is probably the only Spider-Man movie that I would say I dislike, to be honest. Like, even like the Amazing Spider-Man films, they're mostly indifferent. There's a lot of good stuff. There's a lot of bad stuff. This is the only one that doesn't really work for me.
Yeah.
And it's which is kind of strange because I'm such a huge fan of Homecoming. It's normally in my top 5 of the MCU films, and yet Far From Home sits quite low on that list.
Wow.
I have a very complicated relationship with Spider-Man Far From Home. I think for me, it kind of, to me personally, and I'm kind of not speaking for the group, obviously, it kind of undoes a lot of the growth Spider-Man goes through in Homecoming, and kind of takes away a lot of like the big emotional journey that he goes on. I understand other like people kind of read his arc differently in Far From Home, but it just doesn't really work for me. What I love about Homecoming is that idea of like, it's not the Stark tech, and it's not the contacts, and it's not the wanting to be an Avenger that makes him Spider-Man. In fact, at the end of the movie, he actually rejects an offer to join the Avengers in terms of being his own hero. And then in Far From Home, obviously, like the Avengers movies kind of inform that dynamic, and you kind of can't take Infinity War and Endgame out of that equation.
Yeah.
But it feels like a step backwards for me in terms of Peter's dynamic. Even like the scene that's meant to be a big kind of defiant stand of him becoming his own man, where he makes the new costume. He makes it out of Stark tech while listening to Back in Black.
Yeah,
it's like him trying to not be Iron Man, but also still. I find the message of it kind of muddled to me.
I think
I would
that I sort of agree with you on in terms of not being a big fan of it.
I don't know. I think what I don't like is the constant connection to Tony Stark, and I'm hoping that in No Way Home, fingers crossed, that they won't continue that trend of the whole thing is based around Tony Stark, because it shouldn't be necessarily. In sort of like, and the one thing I will say about Far From Home that I'm not too super keen on is the MCU integration. The same thing goes for Homecoming, and same thing will stand for No Way Home. The one thing I don't like about these films, admittedly, is that Spider-Man never is able to stand by himself. On the posters,
Yeah.
in the main promotional for the film, it's always another famous MCU character alongside him, whether it be Iron Man, Nick Fury, or Doctor Strange. It's every single one of these MCU films. I just want Spider-Man to have this thing where he stands by himself, and I feel like he does in Homecoming in the final act. And admittedly, I would also argue here that I absolutely adore the final act of this film as well, and how that's conceived. I will. This is coming from a very interesting standpoint for me, because this might kill you off, Owen. But for my ranking of the MCU, this is also third place.
Wow.
Wow. That might kill
Opinions
me
really
off.
are like ours.
I like it.
I like
it, but that is high. That is very high.
To be fair,
Who's high? George?
I'm just looking potentially. Who knows? with when I'm looking at, I've just realised my letterbox list is Marvel Cinematic Multiverse, and the 1 and 2 places aren't actually in the MCU. So technically, I could say this is my favourite MCU
It's the
film.
damn Venom movies, isn't it, George?
Yeah, that's it. No, for me, it's I put this above, only just above Endgame and Infinity War.
Wow.
Personally,
Wow.
I like
Okay,
how I've
let me
absolutely fucking silenced
This
the
has
room
been
with
Spill
that.
Your
Let me-
Beans. See you guys. I'm out.
Let me give some positives about Far From Home, because I don't want to be like the negative one. 'Cause
No,
that's
of
not what I'm
course,
about.
of course.
Tom Holland continues to be an excellent Spider-Man. I feel like we're very lucky that we've never had an actor play Spider-Man that's anything less than tremendous. Like, talk about like batting hundreds back to back to back. I don't think any character's had that kind of repeated success in terms of recasting.
Apart from
They've
this
not
one,
even had like a...
this guy right here, this Doctor Who guy.
Anyway.
I would
Pretty
agree. I would
good.
agree,
Yeah, pretty good.
but I love the fact that they're probably the two characters that I think they have 100% nailed every single time. But
Yeah.
I
don't
do
know who
agree
that
with
is,
you on
and I'm
Spider-Man.
going to move on.
Okay.
I think both of the MCU Spider-Man films have tremendous villains. I love Michael Keaton as the Vulture, and I think Jake Gyllenhaal, although Taylor Swift fans won't like me saying his name out loud, is a really great Mysterio. The
I
way they
think he's
use the
excellent,
idea of
yeah.
like the way they use like the mocap suit and the idea of like the illusions, like the illusion sequences in this film are breathtaking. I love them so much.
Yeah.
One
I
thing
think
I'm
that's
not huge
Sorry,
on, just as a brief aside, one thing I'm not huge on in this movie is them taking Spider-Man out of New York. I like the idea of like more of an international setting, but I feel like Spider-Man as a character is so intertwined with New York City. To take him out of it kind of feels a bit weird. Like, to me at least, it always kind of feels like there's something missing from that characterization, and it is New York to me.
I would agree with that, actually, and I think it's something that is it's a very good point in terms of the connection of Spider-Man with New York City. One point I'll throw in the way that I really do like about this is that the one thing I really didn't like about the Amazing Spider-Man films, and stand by that, back when I first watched them back now, is they are too similar. And they don't try and be as unique as they can. Whereas one thing I'll give the MCU films credit for is that there is a lot of creative vision to take it in a new direction. Yes, taking him away from New York City is a big thing in this, but like Homecoming, he's not in the city. He's still in Queens. He's still in high school, and I like that because no other Spider-Man film really lingers on that for too long. And then with this, Take Him Abroad, it's something that, yeah, it's very out there, but works within the context of this story. You're at a point in Peter Parker's life where he isn't sure if he wants to keep being Spider-Man. It's definitely nowhere near as well handled as it is in Spider-Man 2 in terms of that sort of not really sure if he wants to step up or not. But I think what really works for me is just I like it. I understand what you mean. I agree. Actually, it is part of his thing, Spider-Man being in New York City. But what I really like about this film is, in a way, how unique it is taking him out of it. Because again, it's one of those things where I couldn't see this being done again.
Yeah.
And I like that. I like that it's this unique. And on the standpoint of Mysterio as a villain, everyone knew it would come in the twist, but it's still a good twist. And I love how they do it. Because I'm halfway through the film, I am sitting there, even the first time, I'm totally aware that he's the villain because I know my Spider-Man stuff. And I'm sat there and I'm thinking, could he be? Could this be the twist that he actually is just a good guy? And when they flip it round and he's maybe he's working for Tony Stark. That's a bit whatever. But I like the
named his life work Barf.
Yeah, but I don't. It's daft, but I like it. And again, the connection of making him less of a magician and more of a VFX artist, I think, is brilliant.
That's a great characterization. The one thing I'll say about the Barf scene is they bring back the box of scraps guy from Iron Man.
So good.
I was in disbelief when they did that because it's weird, but it works because now when you go back and watch that film, it's like, oh, there's the guy from Far From Home. Yeah. Shit, I like that. Guy, I can't deny.
That is nice attention to detail. I do enjoy that. Mm-hmm. Like you said, that I really like the third act of this movie. I think the way they handle the action scenes in this movie in general are kind of really creative and kind of unique.
Yeah, definitely.
It's a movie.
I think it's one of those things again, especially with the illusion sequences. I think it's like it does it so well for me. Like I absolutely adore it, and I think even at the cinema at the time, but even now, it's like it's an absolute masterclass in CGI. And I know there's a lot of criticism for how smooth the suit looks in this film, and even in Homecoming as well. And I get that to an extent, but I like the idea that they establishes in Homecoming that it's because of the Stark tech, it's skin tight on him. Because like the stealth suit doesn't look like that in this. That does look a bit more fabricy, and that's for intention. Like when he's building a Stark tech version of the suit, it is going to be skin tight because that's how it's designed. It's not like the standard sort of material and stuff, so it will look a bit more smooth. But one thing I will say is, you really can't knock the CGI in this film. The VFX work in this is unbelievable. Whether it's in the illusion sequences or whether it's in the any other sequences where they mix live action with VFX, I think it is absolutely stunning, especially towards the final act of this film as well. I think as well the music, Michael Giacchino's always a win, but he absolutely nails it in this. Like a huge step up from Homecoming, which was already a good score. Mm-hmm. This has just got so much more like. Again, I'm always a bit iffy going into this one. I'm always a bit like, is it as good as I remember? But whenever I watch it, I feel like I go through and I get to that final act and I am there. The music, the visuals, the thematic sort of resonance of the whole thing, I think works so well. And, it's fair. I can see the criticisms in it, definitely. But I think for me, what I look for in not just a superhero film, but a Spider-Man film, this manages to hit almost every mark. To be quite honest.
Yeah, I think I'm on pretty much on board with you, George. Obviously, I put it a little bit below Homecoming, just because I think. I don't
But I'm
know.
between the two, to be fair. They are both too similar where it's so difficult. Like they could be the other way around on another day. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I get that. Yeah, I think the reason why I put this just slightly lower is I think it does lean a little bit too heavy into the Stark stuff. I do agree with you, Owen, about that scene on the plane. I think there was a moment where you either stick with the Stark thing, which they did very heavily, or you pull it away, which is what I think they should have done.
Yeah, but I feel like it tries to do both. Yeah, that's my issue with it.
It's
like
it's
that scene is framed as like
standing on his own, but then he's stood there looking like Tony Stark, with Tony Stark's iconic music playing in the background. I think there would have been a moment to have Peter make his own suit like we've seen in the other films, not with Stark tech. I think that would have been the moment. I know it sort of doesn't work as well in terms of the actual MCU story, but I think in terms of Spider-Man's story, that would have been a really good, because you have this nice story in Homecoming where Peter has this father figure, this person that he learns from, the whole training wheels thing, and then obviously in the in-between of those, they have to come off because Tony dies, and then he's trying to stand on his own 2 feet, but he feels like he can't, and he feels anxious and inadequate, and that's when Quentin sort of takes advantage, and then at the end of the film, you have this great final act where Peter stands up to Quentin and he does it on his own, and everything's on his own. I just think the suit thing just takes away from it slightly. just slightly.
I agree. I agree with that point. My problem is I can't see how they would have justified it another way.
Yeah,
maybe not
that's
play
the
Back
thing.
in Black. Maybe not have the thing of him being like the new Iron Man, because that shouldn't be the point of this film. And that's the one thing I really don't like about this, is it's basically going, hey, look, he's the new Iron. No, he's not the new Iron Man. He's not. You've got other characters who are similar enough to Iron Man, or Ironheart's coming up. You can do that then. Spider-Man is his own thing and shouldn't be immediately connected to Tony Stark in much of a context, but even with the MCU, it's a bit too strong.
Yeah.
But one thing I will say about that is, as much as I would love to see him make his own suit at that point without Stark tech, I can't see the logical decision when you've got this huge attack to be like, hey, I want to take out all these drones, do all these things. It's like, oh yeah, I'll just get rid of all of these features that this costume kind of comes with. It's a shame he couldn't do that himself, but I feel like having him still make it with Stark tech or otherwise, I'm not against it in a way, because I feel like it is advanced technology, so long as he's still the one who's putting it together. The ideas of like the little parachute thing and the electric webs and stuff, like he's putting that in. It's him thinking this up, and hopefully we'll get more of that in the next film. Of course, we know there's going to be new suits in the next film as well, so hopefully that is him, and there's not going to be any of that, and it will be, maybe Stark tech, probably Stark tech at this point, let's be honest. But it'd be nice to see him actually putting that together and making it himself.
Yeah, completely agree. Yeah, but yeah, I just think on a whole, I just have a fun time with it. I'm intrigued, just for you, Owen, because I feel like me and you obviously come at these films from a very different perspective, because you're coming at it as a comic book fan as well, and I don't have the context of the comic books. I'm just intrigued. I was just intrigued with all of these films. Do you think it changes the way you view them, or do you?
I don't think so, but you can never be sure.
Yeah.
Like unconscious bias, that thing.
Yeah.
I like to think I'm quite good at just judging a piece of art as its own thing.
Yeah.
Not necessarily as an adaptation. Like if I wanted it to be a Spider-Man comic, I'd read a Spider-Man comic.
Yeah.
I always kind of want adaptations to put their own spin on things and
sure,
take inspiration from great Spider-Man stories, but make something unique and original.
Yeah.
And I think all of these movies borrow elements from classic Spider-Man comics, but do something unique and new with them, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I don't think my issues with Far From Home stem from like comic accuracy. It's still, Mysterio's presented as an incredibly comic accurate character. Yeah. I never thought we'd see the actual fishbowl costume, and that's brilliant.
Yeah, I think the costumes in the MCU, like for the villains especially, they absolutely nail it.
I'd agree with that.
I love the Mysterio suit. I love
even like.
Sorry, you go.
Even the redesigns for some of the older characters in No Way Home, like the design for Electro is such an improvement on the Amazing Spider-Man. Like I love how they've made like the lightning look like his comic mask. It's just a really clever approach.
And even Willem Dafoe as well, a costume that people love in terms of historical context. The fact that they're giving him this sort of like hood, like this sort of purpley hood. And like a sort of damaged suit, and whilst keeping that sort of classic look that we're all familiar with, I think is a brilliant shout. And even like Doc Ock as well, giving him like a green turtleneck and stuff. Things like that, just it does make a difference. And I will say with the MCU iterations of villains, the designs have always been on point. Whether it be Vulture's fantastic, maybe not Shocker, but or Scorpion, I guess. But like with the Vulture, Mysterio, and what looks to be all the villains in the new film, I think they're doing such a good job with them, and I'm so excited to see how they do that next week, which is very strange to say.
Yeah.
I do want to ask Owen, just on a sort of separate point, is because I feel like we've talked, like we've all tried to be kind of, I mean, obviously me and Josh do like this film a lot more than you do. And I feel like you've been quite positive about it. I would like to know, is there anything sort of major that sort of is to why this is sort of right at the bottom of your list?
Yeah, like I said, I kind of have a complicated feeling with this movie, and it's a lot of like what I'm going to describe as negative ones. Like, there's no like single thing where I'm just like, screw this movie, I hate it. There's just a lot of little decisions and little things they do that kind of frustrate me a little bit. Like, I really like Homecoming, and I love the way it progresses Peter's character. And like I said, to me, some of the choices they make in this movie kind of feel like a tread backwards. I understand that like Tony dying is going to have a profound effect on Peter. He is his kind of, as a superhero, like his mentor and someone he looks up to, and losing him is going to have a big effect on him. And we've never really seen how this Spider-Man deals with loss, because they've kind of glossed over the Uncle Ben aspect, which you can make an argument for not wanting to see an old man get shot again. I'm kind of in the camp of, at least say the man's name, please.
Yeah. There's sort of implications of it, but there's never really a concrete thing.
I don't think I'd go as far to say that like the MCU films have replaced Uncle Ben with Tony Stark, but they've
No, but I get what you mean though.
But they've made Tony's death feel like naturally it should be a really big deal, but kind of it makes Ben's role in Spider-Man's life kind of an elephant in the room to me.
Yeah.
And as well, like I appreciate them trying to put it in a different setting and trying to like see how Spider-Man explores a different landscape, but I do feel like you lose something by taking Spider-Man out of New York. It's like taking Batman out of Gotham. Something kind of just doesn't feel right to me. Like I think in terms of like in execution, I think they did it the best they could. They really used some of the like the European set pieces in the action scenes really good. Both the Venice sequence and then the one in London in the third act, I think are both really great action scenes. I like Mysterio in this movie. I'm not huge on him, like his reason to be a villain being so associated with Iron Man, especially given they did kind of the same thing with Vulture. It kind of feels like a bit of a retread. Though once he kind of gets going as a villain, I find him to be a very enjoyable character.
I feel like the one thing I am excited for No Way Home is to see how they do that, because we've had 2 Spider-Man films in the MCU that really connect it with Tony Stark. I don't feel that they can do that as much with the next one. So it'll be interesting to see, because obviously they're already established Spider-Man villains.
I think the one thing I really wanted to see, and it's why, regardless of how good or not No Way Home is, I was really kind of hoping to see someone like Kraven the Hunter in a third film, and have it be someone that has a very like direct tie to Spider-Man, whereas like in the last 2 films, Spider-Man has kind of come into contact with villains whose problems are with other characters, not so much with him. And I'd like to see someone who's like has a very personal vendetta against Holland and against Spider-Man, and it's not Spider-Man kind of getting in the way of other people's feuds. And maybe that's not wholly fair, but at times it can feel like that a little bit to me. But it kind of goes to the testament of Spider-Man movies. Like, this is my least favourite one, and it's still like a solid flick. Like it's not the kind of thing I want to see in a Spider-Man film, but like I'm not going to say it's like a terrible film. There's still a lot to enjoy, and it still feels like Spider-Man. It's not like it's gone that far away that it's lost our sense of identity. It's just not for me, I guess.
That's a really good way of summing it up.
There's that many of them. There's that many Spider-Man movies. I'm not lacking for something to watch with him in.
Yeah, and I think sort of wrapping up the whole thing on the MCU Spider-Man films, the way I kind of view them, and I absolutely adore them, but the way I kind of view them is Spider-Man is one of, if not my all-time favourite comic book hero. It's between him and Batman, because both of them have like a fascinating aesthetic to them, and they've got a fantastic arsenal of villains that are all very memorable, that you can sort of attach yourself to, Batman and Spider-Man alike, and I've always loved that with Spider-Man, and I'll always be happy to see the like Spider-Man interpreted on the big screen, and I like the fact that, if you want a Spider-Man that is very much its own universe and very rooted to the ground, you've got 5 films that you can do that. And I like the fact that the interpretations with the MCU films, despite them, and it does annoy me as well, the so severe connections with the MCU, whether it be Captain America's little sports training video, whether it be the references to Thor or Iron Man, and all that sort of thing. I appreciate that, despite the fact that that annoys me. I appreciate the fact that we've got films that Spider-Man is part of a bigger universe, just like in the comics. Whether it's exactly what you'd want out of it is up to each fan individually, but I think it's great to have that as an extra, so it's not just, here's Spider-Man in New York by himself again. I like the idea that it is this version in this sort of different landscape with different characters around him, and how that influences the character changes things. But yeah, I think unless there's anything that wants to be said about these 2 films, I think we might move on to our second and first place. Right, so I think we'll move on to our second pick, our second place. Josh, what is your second place pick?
Well, Have we all got the same two left?
I think we have, actually. I don't think these two have been mentioned, which is fair enough.
Yeah, this is exciting then.
Yeah.
I'm intrigued to see if we all have the exact same top two. My second favourite Spider-Man film of all time is
That's the X Factor,
Spider-Man 2.
Okay. Owen, what is your second place pick?
My second place pick is Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse.
Ooh. God, this is like the X Factor. It's like Deadlock. Right, hang on. My pick is Spider-Man 2.
Oh.
So,
Okay, one thing I will
This
say.
is interesting.
One thing I will say is I constantly go back and forth on which of these two movies I prefer.
Yeah.
It's kind of like a 1A and 1B scenario more than a 1 and 2. Like
Yeah.
I think these are both like 10 out of 10 films.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, there's no surprise in our first place, of course, but let's just do it anyway for theatre. Owen, what's your first place Spider-Man film? What's your favourite Spider-Man film of all time?
Venom, Let There Be Carnage.
Good choice. Good. Now we go home. Great. Cool. Josh, what's yours?
Mine is Captain America: Civil War.
Good. That's good. Mine is the Japanese Spider-Man film from the 90s. 80s or something.
Oh, lovely.
Have you ever seen the Turkish bootleg Spider-Man
I
film?
haven't. I have not.
I've seen bits. I have seen
his
bits.
eyebrows stick
Oh
out of the
my
mask,
Lord.
and he kills a woman with a boat propeller. And then Captain America teams up with former Mexican professional wrestler El Santo to try and fight him. Also, Spider-Man runs the cartel.
Oh man! Right.
Look for
Just
it.
drop that in at the end. Spider-Man runs a cartel.
That's good.
Yeah.
Spider-Man runs a cartel.
I think it's called. I think the English translation is like Three Kings. It's worth a watch. It's wild.
Three Kings. Right. Well, should we start with?
That's just us.
We'll start
we are
with
three kings.
We are Three Kings. How very festive as well. This is going out in December. We Three Kings.
We three kings of Spider-Man are.
Tag yourself. I'm frankincense.
Oh,
I'm myrrh.
I'm gold then. Yeah.
There you go. You're gold.
Yeah.
That's
That's not too bad. Anyway,
You're gold. Always believe in your soul.
you've got the power to know.
You're
Spider-Man 2
indestructible.
then.
You know, in a Spider-Man podcast
No,
review,
Spider-Man 2. Now, this is a movie I can always believe in.
in a Spider-Man 2 or a Spider-Man podcast generally, I was never expecting various lyrics from Spandau Ballet's Gold to be read out, just point blank.
This is why you bring me on these things.
That's what happens, I suppose.
This is what happens when I don't work.
I
till
know this
7.
much is true, to be fair, so, you know. Wait. Right. That's a different song, isn't it?
Swing it a
I couldn't tell you. Okay, let's start with the final live-action Spider-Man film on this list. Let's talk about Spider-Man 2. Because we've kind of covered the other Raimi ones. This, for me, is the perfect balance of... It's a little bit cheesy, but not as much. And it's not too over the top. This is, to me, one of the just perfect films in terms of... It's a perfect superhero film, I'd say.
Yeah.
And this is probably one of, if not the best superhero film of all time, I'd say. It is genuinely brilliant for what it tries to do, and what it achieves in terms of its villain, its story, its personal connection. You've got the right balance, you know, like with the Mary Jane stuff, that's like right in the middle of the 3-film arc. It's got the right stuff in there. It's not too much, it's not over the top, it's not like dull to watch through. It's that right part of their relationship which they are trying to work out. And you've got the fantastic villain in Doc Ock, played by the wonderful Alfred Molina. And of course, it's Tobey Maguire at his best as Spider-Man. You can't fault this film, I don't think.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think I've spoken a lot about different balances across different things and the way things balance out, and I just think this is so perfectly balanced in terms of how much Spider-Man action we see and how much Peter Parker stuff we see and how much we focus on Doc Ock and how much we focus on Mary Jane and how much and like you said, the cheesiness and the humour and the serious moments. I just think everything is just so finely tuned, and on top of that, you just have so many just unbelievably good individual sequences like scattered around this film, but it's all tied together just so beautifully as well. I just love it. It's so much fun. I think it's one that I've underrated for a while. I think it's probably one of the films I sort of went through my edgy teen stage of thinking, oh my god, the Raimi trilogy is so bad. Oh, it's just so. Oh, Maguire's so bad.
The thing,
I like Garfield, but
the thing for I think the thing for me is I probably wouldn't, if I'm rating it out of 10. I don't know if I'd give it like top marks as like critically as a film compared to like every other film in existence. Which why if you look at my letterbox, it isn't 5 stars. It's slightly less because of that. But as a superhero film, as a Spider-Man film, as in any sort of any of those contexts, it is it's so good. And Owen, you've got your top place, so I want to hear what you have to say on this. It's probably going to be sort of talking the same sort of stuff. We're not going to have much discussion on this because I think we all agree it's brilliant.
Yeah, pretty much.
Look, what can be said about this movie? Let's be real here. That hasn't already been said. The power of the sun in the palm of my hand.
Such a good line. Such a good line.
It's like it feels redundant even talking about this movie. It's amazing. It's either the greatest comic book movie ever or the comic book movie that you wouldn't get the greatest comic book movies ever without.
Yeah.
It manages everything from like Tobey Maguire's performance, which is incredible considering when they were like getting ready to shoot it, it was touch and go as to whether he was even going to be able to do the film because of his back. Like he was seriously injured before they shot the movie, and they literally had Jake Gyllenhaal on standby ready to replace him, which is wild. I love the Spider-Man No More segment of this movie. The raindrops keep falling on my head montage is like peak cinema. Alfred Molina is just maybe one of my favorite characters in any movie ever. It's such like a tragedy of what happens to him. This like the action scenes are great. Obviously, I love the very kind of Evil Dead-esque horror sequence where all the surgeons are getting murdered.
It's genuinely one of the best scenes in any Spider-Man film. I've said that a lot in this podcast, but God.
I'd say it definitely has the best third act, like finale sequence of any comic book movie with him, MJ, and Otto in like the reactor area, and Otto's kind of self-sacrifice. It's just like the whole like I will not die a monster thing is so poignant, and not only like completes his arc in a beautiful way, but kind of reaffirms the journey Peter goes through in that movie.
I think
it's just like
I think it's very telling that he's the only person who's coming back in No Way Home who I'm worried about. Only because, he's a fantastic character, brilliant actor. Can they justify continuing the story of what is already a perfectly wrapped up story arc? As you said, the I will not die a monster. It's very telling that that's the one I'm worried about. Willem Dafoe is just a laugh. He can come back. He was stabbed in the balls, whatever.
Yeah.
Right? Any of the other ones are sort of fine. They can come back. But with Doc Ock, it's like, what a gorgeously done villain that is wrapped up almost perfectly in its own film. Can you do that and justify bringing this exact incarnation of Otto Octavius back?
Yeah.
Can you? I don't know, and we'll find out in about a week. But I genuinely, I'm not convinced as of yet that they can, and I'm interested to see how they do it. And whatever it is, I'm sure it'll be fun and not harm the original too much. But it has to be said, that's the only one I'm worried about for good reason, because this film is so spectacular in how it handles its villains and characters.
Yeah, that's it. If Otto comes back and is just bad guy hates Spider-Man, that is going to really kind of hamper. My kind of hope is that he's the only one of them that kind of maybe starts as a villain but turns good.
Which seems that way, doesn't it? There's a few clips
kind of fights with Spider-Man at the end of the movie.
There's a couple of like minor clips that have been shown in like interview videos and stuff where he's saying to Spider-Man like, "What have you done with my machine?" Which kind of implies that there's some connection there to the Maguire films where it's continuing about his only thing. It was never to be a villain. It was never to rob banks and be, a goofball. It was about this whole thing of you're building this machine, proving he can do it. You know, he's still wanting to be a good guy deep down, but it's his morality that's confused throughout it. And I think
exactly, and it's like
yeah.
The other thing I love with Alfred Molina's portrayal of Doc Ock is like, especially comparing it to other kind of mentorship characters Peter's had in other films. Like Doc Ock is such like a mirror image of what Peter could have grown up into.
Yeah.
Like Doc Ock is a good guy, and he's the kind of person like when like him and Peter are having dinner with his wife at the start of the movie, like that is the kind of person you could see Peter Parker growing into and wanting to be like, and seeing kind of his fall from grace shows that like no person is incorruptible.
Yeah.
Like no one is kind of infallible and altruistic, and even despite all the horrible things he does, he still kind of has that moment of redemption and remains a hero.
But that's one thing
it's so powerful.
Again, that perfect moment of it's like it's turning Peter into a villain without turning Peter into a villain, like Spider-Man 3 does.
But I think more than that, I think it shows Peter that. But I think more than that, it shows Peter that it's not kind of necessarily black and white. It's not good guys and bad guys.
Yeah.
The people he fights, especially in the Raimi films, are all very kind of morally complex characters. It's like Sandman in Spider-Man 3. He's like someone that's like, he says in the film as well, I'm not a bad person, I've just had bad luck. It's like Molina's kind of the perfect encapsulation of that, and like in another life that could have been Peter too. And I just love that dynamic and kind of the mirror image of those two characters.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you bang on with that. Because I know we can't. There's only so much you can say about this film without retreading familiar ground. There's a hot take that I want to throw in there about Alfred Molina and his interpretation of Doc Ock and how that character was done in this. I prefer how the PS4 game did Doc Ock to how Doc Ock's done in this film. And I'm interested to see what you have to think about that.
I don't think those two portrayals are wildly different.
Do you not? I think
obviously like
I think for me,
the situations that make them who they are are different. But I think in terms of like the characterization and the relationship with Peter, I think it's a very kind of similar
That's
approach.
something that's always the main crux of it. I think it's just an interesting one based off of, you know, I absolutely adore this film. I grew up with it. This is the film that I watched again and again and again. Absolute pure nostalgia. And it's not a criticism either way. I think it's just interesting. But I could never see, let's see this Doc Ock survived, right? I could never see this Doc Ock being like a recurring villain for Spider-Man like he is in the comics.
I'd agree with that.
And I think whereas the Spider-Man
that version's not designed to be.
No, that's very true, because it works in the context of a film in sort of in terms of its thematics. Because you could say the same thing about Green Goblin, you know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. These versions are designed to be kind of one and done. Yeah. And then to be brought back in an MCU film 20 years later.
Yeah. Exactly. I think it does work for itself. I just thought it was an interesting point, because something I've realised after playing that game is that, like, man, I fell in love with that interpretation, like, so much. And the student and teacher kind of relationship between the two is the same sort of through both. But the one thing I really love about the PS4 version is that he does feel like a villain that could come back, a recurring sort of character, that his motivations and are what drives him, whilst it being kind of exaggerated. I don't know, it's weird. It's an interesting point, and I just think because I hear quite a lot that this is the, like, obviously, I mean, for no bad reason, like, this is probably the definitive version of Doc Ock we'll ever see in live action, and rightfully so. He's incredible. Yeah. I just thought it's an interesting point to raise, is how do you guys stand on that in terms of, I mean, if you're familiar with the game, that is.
I know bits. I haven't played it a lot. I'm not a massive video game person.
That's fair.
But what I know of it, I mean, from what I've heard from people is that the game gets a lot of stuff pretty spot on. And what I know of the game, I think looks great. But yeah, I haven't really played much of it, to be honest. So.
I've played the game multiple times. I'm a huge fan of both of the Insomniac Spider-Man games, and yeah, I think that, like, if you were ever going to do another not Alfred Molina version of Doc Ock, like say we weren't having No Way Home and the MCU were bringing their own Doc Ock, that would probably be a good direction to go. Maybe make him like his college professor or something. Yeah, and kind of have that mentorship that way.
That's one thing.
It's a similar enough. Like, there's enough inspiration and overlap with the Molina version, was making him still a very relatable and sympathetic character, but he's a bit more villainous in the games, where like in the Raimi movie, he's kind of corrupted by the arms.
Yeah, yeah.
In the game, like he is personally corrupted by the circumstances he finds himself in.
Yeah.
So it's two different approaches to come to a similar conclusion.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think when before they sort of did No Way Home and sort of started advertising that for what it is, I was always under the impression where I was like, I would absolutely adore them in the future of the MCU to do a thing where after school Peter does, join a mentorship thing underneath Otto Octavius, and they do it like they did in the video game, where it's a slow burning progress where Octavius has his own problems in life caused by particular people in power, and when the arms start to corrupt his morality, that's what he takes it out on. It's an interesting one, but I think I think we've kind of covered that there. Is there anything else that we want to say about Spider-Man 2 before moving on to Into the Spider-Verse?
Yes, I feel like there is one big thing that we need to mention, which is the heart and soul of the entire Raimi trilogy, which is J. Jonah Jameson.
Oh my God! How have we gone through this whole thing?
And we have not mentioned J. Jonah Jameson, because we didn't even mention him in Far From Home. Oh my God, the funniest character
incredible.
in possibly any film.
It's funny because
ever.
I actually think Jameson's the best in Spider-Man 3.
I think he's hilarious.
I think that's
Spider-Man 3.
that has the
Spider-Man
best
3
Jameson one-liners
so
for
funny.
me.
I think
the bit that always gets
them,
me is
go on.
The bit that always gets me in Spider-Man 3 is where like emo Peter's like flirting with Betty Brant. And they're like kind of like hanging on the desk, and Jameson walks in and he's like, "Miss Brandt, that's not the position I hired you for." Yeah. Like, it's an incredible line.
There's also this. I'm just trying to get it. Just remember, just because I need to mention my favourite joke in any Spider-Man film. I'm pretty sure it's Spider-Man 2, where he's running and he's shouting, "I'm back, I'm back." And then he falls, and then he goes, "My back, my back."
Yeah.
Is that Spider-Man 2? Am I right in saying that's Spider-Man 2? It is. The funniest line. I just love that joke so much. It had me in tears. But yeah, J. Jonah Jameson, the best character in Spider-Man, and my God, I'm so happy that he's back because it's the one thing that I'm most excited for, and the genius of bringing him back as an Alex Jones parody, with like his own podcast, is so funny.
Yeah, it's perfect.
Which is
it's just a perfect
one thing I will say. It's
do.
kind of funny about that, given that's the portrayal they give him in this PS4 game.
Yeah, same sort of thing. Yeah,
and he's fantastic in that. It's funny the thing you said there about like the big heart and soul of Spider-Man that we're missing. I thought you were going to say the sequence in Spider-Man 2 on the train. Because
that's unbelievable.
You talk about like moments that kind of encapsulate what Spider-Man's relationship with New York.
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah.
But like you think of scenes that like encapsulate like how much New York informs Spider-Man's identity and how much Spider-Man informs the identity of New York. The scene after the train fight where like they're all the passengers are carrying his body through and they give him the mask back, and everyone like swears secrecy. And just the bit where Doc Ock shows up on the train, it's like, you've got to go through all of us, and then Doc Ock just immediately just like pushes all these people out of the way. Like, it really shows that like Spider-Man's a man of the people, and like the people love Spider-Man and will stick up for him. Like, New York feels like a character in these movies, and I can't stress enough like how much
that's important.
I love that.
Yeah, it's a very important thing for Spider-Man, and I'll totally agree that it's one thing the MCU is tragically missing, is that connection, that deep-seated root to New York culture and New York people. That these films get
I don't
right.
so much blame. Yeah, with that, I don't so much blame like the Spider-Man movies for that. I kind of, that's one of my gripes with the MCU in general.
Yeah.
They don't focus, especially like the more recent films, like some of the early ones, like the first Avengers movie does that a lot. They don't focus a lot on kind of the normal everyman. Like they do it a bit in Endgame, and obviously they do it in the first Avengers movie. But I would like a bit more of like an on-the-ground human perspective.
Yeah.
I think that's why I like Shang-Chi so much. Like there's a good amount of that in that movie.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a really good point. Is there anything else we want to sort of wrap up saying Spider-Man 2 before we sort of move on to Into the Spider-Verse?
It's really bloody good.
Yeah, it is excellent.
It's probably the greatest sequel of all time.
Yeah,
Yeah.
to be honest,
It's up there.
definitely.
Yeah.
It's like it's up there with like The Dark Knight and Empire Strikes Back for like the greatest sequel.
I love it. I love that topic of sequels that are better than the originals, and this definitely falls into Toy Story 2 category as well for me. Like,
definitely.
Just great sequels.
Absolutely.
I can't believe I have to drive all the way to work on a Saturday. All the way to work. My favourite gag in any movie ever.
On the note of animated films, let's talk about Into the Spider-Verse. Do you like that? Do you see what I did there? Yeah.
Love it.
Into the Spider-Verse.
This isn't your first podcast, really.
Oh man, yeah, no. With Into the Spider-Verse, I think it's obviously we've praised Spider-Man 2 to the nth degree, and I've not said much bad about it. And I've said it's probably I will go on record again and say that Spider-Man 2 is probably one of, if not the best superhero film. It's not that I'm not regarding Into the Spider-Verse as a superhero film, but Into the Spider-Verse does something that I'm not expecting from a superhero film or a Spider-Man film, but it perfectly, and I stress, perfectly encapsulates what Spider-Man is. And I talked about it earlier on in this podcast, but the idea that anyone can be behind the mask is exemplified no better than in this film. They used various versions of Peter Parker. They have Gwen Stacy, they have Miles Morales, they have a pig. Like they have multiple parts of this where it really encapsulates that, and that's the big sort of crux of this film for me, is that not only is it a gorgeously animated, fantastic looking film, but it's also like a phenomenal way of going, right, here's Spider-Man, here's what it is, whilst having that sort of tongue-in-cheek tribute aspect to other Spider-Man films in the same sort of way that like the Lego Movie or Lego Batman did.
Yeah.
I have like a real love for this movie. I vividly remember the first time I saw it in the cinema, and just I've had few greater experiences watching a movie for the first time than this. Mostly because like my anticipation for Spider-Verse wasn't particularly high, because it was brought to you by the great people who made the Emoji Movie. And like just like my expectations versus my reality were just on completely different planes of existence. The animation style is so unique. I've never seen an animated film bring the style of a comic book to life quite like Spider-Verse. Like, it feels like a comic book in motion. It's beautiful. And as someone that like has a deep affinity for the Miles Morales character, was reading the Ultimate Spider-Man comics when Peter was killed off and they brought Miles in. You know, as someone that's kind of gone on that journey with Miles over the last like 10 years of him existing as a character, seeing like him be brought to the big screen in such like a loving tribute way to not only like his character, but to like the idea and the concept of what Spider-Man represents so perfectly, not just through Miles but through all of them. It's a damn masterpiece. It's an
incredible
movie.
It's incredible.
It might be one of, if not the greatest animated movie I've ever seen.
Oh, definitely.
It's just it's perfect.
The
movie's that good, it made me like... The movie's that good, it makes me like a Post Malone song. What more needs to be said?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. No, I'm with you guys. Like this, like in terms of like remembering the first time I watched it, I remember I'd had a very stressful day. I'd done all my Christmas shopping, and I had a couple of hours to kill. I was like, I'm going to go to the cinema, and I'd never been to the cinema on my own before. And then I was sat exhausted, surrounded by my Christmas shopping, with a bunch of kids in a cinema, and I was like. The kids were separate from me. I didn't just collect children on my way around the city.
I was going to say, was that the Christmas? Was that what you were getting people for Christmas?
It's part of the Christmas shopping.
Yes. Yeah. And I just sat down, and I was like, I have absolutely zero expectations for this film. And then I witnessed one of my favourite films of all time, and it's just because like all of the points that you made there. I mean, like in terms of the animation. And you said like how it brings comic books to life. There would have been such an obvious way and quite a static and dull way to bring a comic book to life, which is just flicking through panels and do dot art style for everything, and just you like how you would expect people to bring a comic book film to life in animation. But they even mess with that, and it's just
it's such a kinetically looking movie.
Yeah,
whilst also having the
yeah.
feel of a very still image.
It's
great.
gorgeous. Yeah, it pays homage to animation, to film, and to comic books at the same time. But whilst paying homage, it is unlike anything I've ever seen before in my life.
Yeah, genuinely.
It's insane.
What?
And
Go on, Josh. Go on.
Go ahead. No, I wasn't going to say anything.
Oh,
I just made a noise, I think.
For me, it's one of those ones where the one thing I hate more is when animated films are made and they feel like they could have just been done in live action. This is one of the first, I mean, there's plenty of examples, but this is one of the best examples where I'm like, this could not have been done any other way. You could have told the same story in live action, it wouldn't have been as good. It really wouldn't have been. No. Even though it's got a fantastic story and some fantastic thematic stuff in there with what it means to be Spider-Man. I love the style of this film is exactly what makes it. The comic booky aspects of it, the music as well. The music is phenomenal, and the sound effects and all the little inside jokes and references. It all culminates in that sort of thing. But even the minor stuff, like the way that Miles is animated at a lower frame rate at the beginning of the film to what he is when he becomes Spider-Man, and then he becomes more fluid. Genius. Because it's the minor details like that really stick with you, and it's like, you can watch this film with someone, I mean, I have watched this film with someone who doesn't even like Spider-Man as a character, believe it or not, and they adored it. Because of the filmmaking point of view, the way they use frame rate, the way they use colour and music and style and imagery, it's totally unique and manages to just, you know, it may not be my, like, you know, it may not be my favourite superhero film in terms of, like, traditional, you know, what superhero films can be, but this is probably one of the best films, full stop, I think I've ever seen, because of it. You know, I love a film that's unique stylistically, and I love a film that's different and out there, and Into the Spider-Verse has so much going for it. Every single scene, whether it's a tongue-in-cheek daft like reference or whether it's something serious with heart, the whole film has it all. Every single scene, you cannot look away. All the memes about the size of the Kingpin don't matter to me, because it works within the context of the film. It doesn't matter whether something's realistic or not realistic. I can't believe they managed to get like an anime robot Spider-Man, Spider-Ham, a noir Spider-Man, Spider-Gwen, a normal Peter Parker, and Miles Morales in the same film, and it feel thematically consistent with one another.
Yeah,
it's incredible. It's incredible.
It doesn't feel overstuffed. I think one of like, we're all, because this is interesting, because we're now going into the fact that we're basically going to get a film that tries a very similar thing, but in live action next week with Spider-Man with No Way Home. So it's interesting. Like, obviously, I think a lot of people's main concerns with No Way Home is you've got like 5 or 6, probably 6. Let's be honest. I think I think most people are going to expect there to be another villain in there to make it probably a Sinister Six movie. You've got 6 villains, and not confirmed, but we imagine you might at some point have 3 Spider-Men in that film.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh wow!
You never know. So it's going to be the Japanese one, and then that Turkish guy as well.
Oh, brilliant! That's everything I've ever wanted.
Yeah, the eyebrows out of the suit as well and everything. I think everyone's concern is that it's going to be a bit overstuffed, and it's insane that you have so many different versions of the same character that are all completely different. And I adore every single one of them within seconds of them appearing on screen. And I adore every supporting character. I adore every villain. I can, within the first 2 or 3 lines of every single character in this film, I'm just connected with them, because the performances are so good. It's one thing that I think gets underrated in this film as well, is the voice acting performances. The models of the characters are just brilliant, and I could just talk about this film for hours. I love every single bit of it.
And we can't really talk about it for hours. We haven't got that much time to talk about this film, but I could as well. And like it shows a lot towards the film itself that like despite what I've talked about like villains looking like accurate to their comic book selves and having like decent costumes and stuff, this film just disregards that entirely. Scorpion looks very strange. Like Green Goblin's like a giant demon dragon thing. Like Dr. Octopus is not the traditional Dr. Octopus that we'd expect. Yet all of the interpretations, specifically Doc Ock, where I point out, is phenomenal. That twist of...
I love what they do with Doc Ock in this
honestly,
movie.
blew me
so
away.
clever.
I never thought I'd see something that I was like that impressed with in terms of Doc Ock other than Alfred Molina at that point.
And the cool thing is with it as well, because like obviously like Green Goblin's a very different iteration, but that's heavily rooted in like the Ultimate Comics, where the Green Goblin is more of like a Hulk figure. I have never really seen a version of Doc Ock like that before.
Yeah.
Like I think there have been a female version in the comics in the past, but not actually Otto Octavius.
Yeah.
And just like normally like taking a pre-existing character and swapping the gender, it's done in a way in this movie where it's just so natural and it works so
natural,
well.
and it works incredibly. Like
That's such a cool version of that character that I'd love to see more of.
Yeah, and even like the tentacles being different and stuff, it's like it fits with the theme of the film and the style of it. But yeah, no, I think this film is as perfect of a superhero or Spider-Man film you can possibly get, and it's a great sort of note to sort of end this podcast on. Is there any more burning points you want to talk about this film before we sort of wrap this up?
I'm not gonna get into it because I will be here. It is a 10 out of 10 film.
And absolutely.
The only thing I want to mention that we've not touched on is the leap of faith scene.
Oh my god!
Chef's kiss, beautiful, love it.
Yes.
I love like I'm a big fan of his uncle as a character anyway, just from the comics and from the games and stuff. But the way he is like an inverse of Peter's Uncle Ben to me is fascinating, because of like losing an uncle that kind of inspires him to be a hero, but that uncle also being a villain is such like a great flip on that kind of archetype, and it's done in such a great way. I love the scenes with him and his uncle at the start of the movie where they're just like hanging out and graffitiing together. Like they have such a strong relationship, which makes one, finding out he's the Prowler, and two, seeing him die. It's just so emotionally resonant. It's beautiful.
And I just find it. I was coming. This was such a weird experience because I knew nothing about Miles Morales going into this. I did not know who the character was. I had no context. Or everything that I know of Miles Morales comes from this film.
Same here. Yeah.
And
and I just even like having read the comics.
Yeah. You'd like
having read like
he's quite a new character, really, isn't he? Like you said, about 10 years or something, relatively, compared to some of the other characters that we've been discussing who've been around for decades.
And that's 10 years, not even in like 10 years starting in a different universe. It's only kind of in the last 5 that he's actually been in like the main Marvel books.
Yeah.
But like even having read the comics and being pretty familiar with that version of Miles, I'd still say Spider-Verse is like the best and the most definitive portrayal. Like even the video game is very much based off the way he's presented in Spider-Verse. Like that seems to be just who Miles is, and it's a beautiful character and it's a beautiful movie. I love it a lot. And yet it's only my number 2.
Yeah, I think I care about
Spider-Man movies are great.
Miles more than any of the live action Peter Parkers, and I just have a now. I think I grew up with Maguire, and obviously he is my Spider-Man in a way. I think Tom Holland is one of my favourites. He's my Spider-Man. I've got a new love for Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man, but I think for me, my just personal favourite Spider-Man is now Miles Morales in Spider-Verse.
I get that.
And I'm so excited. I wish I had. I love. I'm excited for No Way Home, but nowhere near as excited as I am for the Spider-Verse sequels.
Yeah, I think as well the one thing that Spider-Verse did really well, which I think is maybe not thought about as much, but for me as a lifelong Spider-Man fan, like he's the first superhero that I watched, I got into as a kid. You know, I had like the picker-upper Doc Ock arm things. You know, I was such a huge fan of this character and always have been. And every interpretation, whether it be in the MCU or whether it be elsewhere, has always been like, yeah, I know this, I'm familiar with this. What Spider-Verse did is it gave me it almost reintroduced me to Spider-Man. It's like, you know Spider-Man, but you don't know this Spider-Man. So here you go. Like, this is what it also could be. And to sit there as a Spider-Man fan and be given new Spider-Man that isn't the same as anything else I've seen before, and it's almost reintroducing that to me, was absolutely fascinating and such a gorgeous experience. I really wasn't that excited for this film. I didn't know much about it. One of my mates knew who Spider-Gwen was, and that's about all the connection I had with it. I wasn't really even sure on Miles Morales. But when I sat down in the theatre and in the opening few minutes, seconds, I don't even know, I knew I was going to love it. Just everything about it.
It's perfect.
But yeah, I think we've kind of...
God damn it.
I think...
now I want to watch Spider-Verse again.
Oh, I watch it like every year at least. It's a constant for me.
I know what I'm doing today.
But I think we've kind of wrapped up our thoughts on that. So before we do sign off on this very long, extended panel review podcast, I think it might be our longest ever episode, which is quite impressive.
This is what happens when you invite me on.
I'll ask you guys if you have any sort of links to stuff that you would like to share, little shout out about it now. It's your time to just say whatever you want, promote your stuff, go.
Owen, you go first.
Well, yeah, thanks, George, for having me on. Josh, it was a pleasure to chat with you for the first time.
Yeah, we don't know each other at all. It's not like we've known each other for 12 years.
I'm glad that you're counting. If you enjoyed listening to me ramble about Spider-Man, you should head on over to youtube.com/OwenLikesComics. The day we're recording this, I've actually just dropped a Spider-Man video about one of my favourite Spider-Man stories, Kraven's Last Hunt. If you've not read it, watch my video and then go read it, because it's great. youtube.com/OwenLikesComics, video essays about comic books and comic history and fun stuff. And follow me on Twitter @OwenLikesComics. Yeah, it's a fun time.
Yeah, I have absolutely nothing Spider-Man related to promote. This is the first time I've done anything remotely non-Doctor Who related. I do a Doctor Who podcast called Who Knew, a Doctor Who podcast, where I interview people in and around the lovely world of Doctor Who. George has been on many times.
Many times. Too many to count.
Owen would not touch it with a barge pole. And you can find that on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And also I'm on Twitter @WhoKnewPodcast or @JoshRyanCarr.
Good stuff. And obviously, if you want to follow the Spill Your Beans content as well, we're @SpillYourBeans on Twitter and @SpillYourBeansPod on Instagram, @GBSheard for my personal account, both on Twitter and Instagram, and we'll occasionally be posting stuff on TikTok as well, which is all linked in my sort of socials. Thanks so much for coming on, guys. Really appreciate it. It's been a great episode. And for those listening, this is, I believe, the final episode of our second season for this podcast. So there will be a little bit of a break before we come back. But I'm expecting to return in the new year with some new and exciting stuff. So yeah, stay tuned, and I'll see you all later. Have a lovely day.
See you all later, guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you for having me. Bye.
Bye.